The wind came down from the mountains like a blade, sharp enough to cut skin, cold enough to promise death. Eliza Hart stood in the doorway of the cabin, staring at the gray sky pressing down on the valley like a coffin lid about to close. Behind her, her father coughed, wet, rattling, the kind of sound that meant the end was closer than anyone wanted to admit. She didn't turn around. If she looked at him now, she'd fall apart, and she couldn't afford that. Not today. Eliza. His voice barely made it across the room. Come here. She took a breath, tasting snow in the air, even though it was only September. Winter was coming early this year. Everyone in town said so. The farmers, the merchants, even old Mrs. Calloway, who claimed she could feel weather in her bones. They all agreed. Early winter meant trouble. It meant cattle dying, crops failing, supplies running out before spring could save you. It meant people like them wouldn't make it. Eliza turned and walked back inside, pulling the door shut against the wind. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms carved out of desperation and stubbornness. The walls were thin enough that you could hear mice scratching between the boards at night. The stove in the corner burned low. They were rationing wood now, making every log count. Her father sat propped against pillows on his cot, his face the color of old newspaper. Thomas Hart had been a big man once, the kind who could swing an axe all day and still have energy to laugh at dinner. Now he looked like something the wind might blow away. I need to tell you something, he said. You need to rest. There's no time for rest. He coughed again, hard enough that his whole body shook. When he pulled his hand away from his mouth, there were flecks of red on his palm. He wiped it on the blanket quickly, like she hadn't already seen. Sit down. She sat on the wooden chair beside his bed, the same chair her mother had died in 6 years ago. Different disease, same result. This valley had a way of taking everything from you, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but dust and regret. The debts, her father said. Do you know how much we owe? I know it's bad. It's worse than bad. He reached under his pillow and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellow with age and handling. $347. The number hit her like a fist. $300 might as well be $3,000. They didn't have $3. The last of their cattle had died in July. The garden had produced maybe half of what they needed. She'd been selling off her mother's things, the good dishes, the quilts, even the silver brush and mirror set that had come all the way from Philadelphia, just to buy flour and coffee. How? She asked. Seeds that didn't grow. Medicine that didn't work. The new roof we put on 3 years back. He looked at the ceiling, where water stains spread like cancer across the rough wood. A lot of good that did. And the loan from Crawford. James Crawford. Eliza's hands clenched into fists. Crawford owned half the businesses in town and held mortgages on the other half. He was the kind of man who smiled when he shook your hand and calculated how much he could squeeze out of you behind his eyes. When's it due? 2 weeks. 2. She stood up fast enough that the chair scraped against the floor. You're just telling me this now? I thought I could fix it. His voice cracked. I thought I'd get better, find work, sell something. But there's nothing left to sell, Eliza, nothing except this land, and Crawford already said he'll take it when I can't pay. He's got buyers lined up, city people from Denver who want to build some kind of resort up here. She paced to the window, looking out at the land her father had worked for 20 years. It wasn't much, 40 acres of stubborn soil, half of it rocks, the other half trying to be rocks. But it was theirs. It was home. I'll find work, she said. The general store, already asked. They're cutting hours, not hiring. Then the hotel, or the saloon. I can wash dishes, clean rooms. You think I haven't tried? He was getting agitated now, his breathing coming faster. There's no work, Eliza. The whole valley's dying. Half the family's already packed up and left. The ones who stayed are barely hanging on themselves. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Outside, the clouds were getting darker. First snow would come soon. Maybe tonight. There's one option, her father said quietly. She turned. Something in his voice made her stomach twist. There's a man, he continued, name's Rowan Hale. Came into town about a month ago. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's been asking around about the area, about the people here. What kind of asking? The kind where he's looking for something specific. Thomas coughed again, softer this time. He came to see me 3 days ago. You've been talking to strangers about our business? He made me an offer. Her father met her eyes, and she saw something there that scared her more than the debts, or the winter, or any of it. She saw surrender. He said he'd pay off everything, the debts, the loan, all of it. Give us enough extra to get through winter comfortable. Eliza's heart was pounding now. In exchange for what? The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. He wants a wife, Thomas said. He wants you. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and real at the same time. You're not serious. I told him no at first, threw him out of the cabin, told him to go to hell. Her father's voice was shaking. But he came back yesterday, and I started thinking, really thinking, about what happens if I say no. I die, probably within the month. You're left here alone with debts you can't pay. Crawford takes the land. You end up in town with nothing, working whatever job you can find, if you can find one. Or worse. There are worse things than being poor, Eliza said. Yes, her father said. And most of them happen to women alone with no money and no protection. She wanted to argue, but she couldn't. She'd seen it herself. Women who ended up in situations they couldn't escape because they had nowhere else to go. Mrs. Patterson, working at the saloon because her husband died, and left her with 3 children. Sarah Mitchell, married off at 16 to a man 40 years older because her family couldn't feed her anymore. The widow Jensen, who disappeared one winter and nobody asked too many questions about where she'd gone or why. What do you know about this man? Eliza asked. Not much. He's quiet, polite, doesn't drink or gamble from what I can tell. Has money, obviously. And what does he want with me, with us? He said he's looking to settle down, start a life away from wherever he came from. Thomas shifted in his bed, grimacing. I asked him why here, why you. He said this valley suits him, said you seemed capable. Capable? The word tasted bitter. That's romantic. This isn't about romance, Eliza. This is about survival. She walked back to the chair and sat down hard. Her whole body felt numb, like she'd been dunked in the creek in January. You can't ask me to do this. I'm not asking. Her father reached out and took her hand. His skin was hot with fever, dry as paper. I'm telling you what your options are. You can marry this man, who from what I can tell isn't cruel or violent, and secure your future. Or you can watch me die knowing you'll be alone and destitute in a few weeks. Those are the choices. Those aren't choices. That's a trap. Maybe. He squeezed her hand weakly. But it's the trap we're in. Eliza sat there for a long time, listening to the wind howl around the cabin and her father's labored breathing. She thought about her mother, who'd come west full of hope and died before 40, worn down by this place. She thought about all the dreams she'd had as a girl, vague, foolish dreams about love and adventure and a life bigger than these 40 acres of rock. Those dreams seemed like they belonged to someone else now. When does he want an answer? She asked finally. Tomorrow. He's staying at the boarding house in town. What's he look like? Her father almost smiled. Go see for yourself. Eliza rode into town the next morning on their old mare Bess, who was more bones than horse at this point. The clouds from yesterday had delivered on their promise. Snow covered the ground in a thin white sheet, already melting in the morning sun, but promising more to come. The town of Clearwater was barely worthy of the name. One main street, maybe 20 buildings total, half of them empty. The general store, the saloon, the boarding house, the church, a few other businesses hanging on by their fingernails. At the end of the street, James Crawford's house sat like a fat spider in the center of its web. 2 stories, painted white, with actual glass windows and a wraparound porch. Eliza tied Bess outside the boarding house and stood there for a moment, trying to steady herself. She'd barely slept. All night she'd lain awake, turning the situation over in her mind like a puzzle with no solution. Marriage to a stranger. It sounded like something from a dime novel, melodramatic and unreal. But the debts were real. Her father's illness was real. The winter coming down from the mountains was as real as death. The boarding house door opened and a man stepped out. Eliza's first thought was that he didn't look like someone who'd buy a wife. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with dark hair that needed cutting and a beard that was just starting to come in heavy for winter. He wore simple clothes, wool pants, a thick shirt, sturdy boots. Nothing fancy, but nothing cheap either. His eyes were dark, hard to read. He saw her and stopped. "Miss Hart," he said. His voice was low, quiet, the kind of voice that didn't waste words. "Mr. Hale." She lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. "I understand you've made my father an offer." "I have." "That's a hell of a thing to offer." "It's a hell of a situation." He came down the steps slowly, not threatening, but not apologetic either. "Your father's dying. You're about to lose everything. I have money and need a wife. Seems like our problems solve each other. You make it sound like a business transaction." "Isn't it?" The bluntness threw her. She'd expected him to dress it up somehow, make it prettier than it was. But he just stood there, looking at her with those steady dark eyes, not flinching from the truth of it. "Why me?" she asked. "You're strong. You work hard. You don't complain." He glanced at the mountains in the distance. "Those are rare qualities. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. I've been watching this town for weeks. You come in every few days, sell whatever you can, buy only what you absolutely need. You don't gossip. You don't waste time. When Jacob Morrison's cart broke down on the road, you helped him fix it and didn't ask for anything in return. That tells me what I need to know." The fact that he'd been watching her should have been creepy, but somehow it wasn't. It just felt thorough, like he'd done his research before making an investment. "What if I say no?" she asked. "Then I move on. Find someone else. Somewhere else." He met her eyes. "And you figure out how to survive winter with no money, no food, and a father who will be dead before Christmas. You're not even going to pretend to romance me? Would you believe it if I did?" She almost laughed. It came out as more of a cough. "No." "Then why waste both our time?" He shifted his weight, and she noticed for the first time that he moved careful, like someone who'd been hurt before and learned to protect old injuries. "I'm not offering you love, Miss Hart. I'm offering you security. A roof that doesn't leak, food in winter, a future that isn't begging James Crawford for scraps. And what do you get out of this? A wife who knows how to survive, someone who won't fall apart when things get hard." He looked back at the boarding house, then at her again. "I've spent enough time around soft women who think life is supposed to be easy. I need someone who understands it's not." There was something in the way he said it, bitter, like he was talking about someone specific. Eliza filed that away. If she was actually considering this insanity, she needed to know who this man was. "Where are you from?" she asked. "Back east." "That's not an answer. It's the one you're getting right now." His voice wasn't harsh, just final. "If you marry me, you'll learn everything eventually. But I'm not laying my whole life out for inspection before I know if there's even a deal to make." Fair enough, she supposed. She wasn't exactly volunteering her own history either. "Your father said you'd pay off all the debts," she said. "Every cent, plus $500 extra for you to use however you want." $500. That was more money than Eliza had seen in her entire life combined. "And if the marriage doesn't work? If we can't stand each other?" Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or respect. "Then we figure it out like adults. I'm not interested in keeping someone prisoner, but I'm also not interested in wasting my money on someone who's going to run off at the first sign of difficulty." "How do I know you're not some kind of criminal or crazy?" "You don't," he shrugged. "Just like I don't know you're not going to poison my coffee first chance you get. That's what trust is, a risk you take because the alternative is worse." Eliza looked at him for a long moment, trying to see past the surface to whatever lay underneath. He didn't look crazy. He didn't look cruel. He looked tired mostly, and lonely in a way that had nothing to do with being alone. She recognized that loneliness. She saw it in her own reflection every morning. "I need to think about it," she said. "Take your time. I'll be here until tomorrow evening. After that, I'm moving on." He turned to go back inside, then paused. "For what it's worth, I hope you say yes. I think we could do worse than each other." It wasn't exactly a declaration of affection, but something about the simple honesty of it made her throat tight. She rode back home through the melting snow, her mind spinning in circles. When she got to the cabin, her father was awake, sitting up in bed with a cup of weak tea. "Well?" he asked. "He's strange." "That's not a no." Eliza took off her coat and hung it by the door. Her hands were shaking, and she couldn't tell if it was from cold or fear or something else entirely. "He's offering $847 total, enough to pay Crawford and have extra." "That's generous." "That's suspicious." She sat down hard on the chair. "People don't just give away that kind of money. Rich people do when they want something bad enough." "He doesn't seem rich. Not fancy rich, anyway. Maybe he's the kind of rich that doesn't need to show off." Her father set down his tea. "What's your gut say?" Eliza closed her eyes. Her gut said she was terrified. Her gut said this was insane. Her gut said that marrying a stranger was the kind of thing that ended badly in every story she'd ever heard. But her gut also said that staying here meant watching her father die in poverty and then following him into whatever dark place came after. "I think I don't have a choice," she said quietly. "You always have a choice." "No." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "No, I really don't. Not any real choice. I can marry him and maybe have a chance at something better. Or I can stay here and know exactly how bad it's going to be." Thomas looked at her with eyes that were ancient and sad and filled with more regret than any man should carry. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Eliza. You deserved better than this. Better than me." She went to him then, knelt by the bed and took his hot hands in hers. "You did your best. This valley breaks everyone eventually. You lasted longer than most. Your mother would be ashamed of me. Mama would understand." Eliza squeezed his hands gently. "She always did what she had to do to survive. She'd tell me the same thing." They sat like that for a while, not talking, just being together in the cold cabin while the wind scratched at the walls like something trying to get in. Finally, her father spoke. "If you do this, you do it smart. You keep your eyes open. You don't trust him completely until you're sure." He coughed, wet and rattling. "And if he hurts you, if he's cruel or violent, you run. You hear me? I don't care about the money or the debts. You run and you don't look back." "I will." "Promise me." "I promise." He nodded, satisfied. Then he lay back against the pillows, exhausted by the conversation. "When will you tell him?" "Today." Eliza stood up, feeling like she was about to jump off a cliff. "Before I lose my nerve." She found Rowan Hale in the saloon of all places, though he wasn't drinking. He sat at a table in the back, playing cards with 3 other men. Not poker, something else, something with complicated rules that Eliza didn't recognize. He saw her come in and excused himself from the game. The other men watched her with curiosity that felt like ants crawling on her skin. Women didn't usually come into the saloon, not unless they worked there. "Miss Hart," he gestured to an empty table in the corner. "Join me?" She sat down across from him, very aware of the attention they were drawing. By tonight, everyone in Clearwater would know Eliza Hart had met with the stranger from the boarding house. By tomorrow, they'd have theories about why. Let them talk. She was past caring. "I have conditions," she said without preamble. His eyebrows rose slightly. "You're accepting?" "If you agree to my terms." "Let's hear them." She took a breath. She'd thought about this all the way back to town, rehearsing in her head. "First, my father. He needs to be comfortable for however long he has left. Medicine, firewood, food, whatever he needs. Done. Second, I want the money promised in writing, a legal contract that says if you back out or if something happens to you, I get to keep it. Also done. Third, this was the hard one. I need time. I'm not ready to... the marriage itself is one thing, but I'm not... She felt her face heating up, hating that she couldn't just say it directly. "You're not ready for the physical aspects," Rowan said calmly, saving her from having to finish. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. We can wait until you're comfortable. I'm not interested in forcing anything." The relief was so intense it made her dizzy. "Really? Really?" He leaned back in his chair. I'm not a saint, Miss Hart, but I'm not a monster either. When I take you to bed, I want it to be because you're willing, not because you feel obligated. The casual way he said it, when, not if, sent a strange shiver through her. But there was no menace in it, just matter-of-fact certainty. Anything else? He asked. I want to know where we're going, after the wedding. North, about 3 days' ride from here. There's a valley I've been working on, building a place. What kind of place? You'll see when we get there. He saw her expression and added, I'm not being mysterious to be difficult. I just think it's better if you see it yourself rather than me trying to describe it. She didn't like that answer, but she also knew she didn't have much leverage to push harder. And you swear you'll take care of my father? I swear. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. I'll hire someone to stay with him full time. Doc Warren can visit regularly. He'll have everything he needs, and when the time comes, we'll give him a proper burial. I promise you that. Eliza felt something crack open in her chest. Grief and relief mixed together until she couldn't tell which was which. She'd been so scared that her father would die alone while she was gone, that he'd spend his last days suffering because she couldn't afford to help him. Okay, she heard herself say. Okay, I'll marry you. Rowan didn't smile or celebrate or do any of the things she might have expected. He just nodded once, like they'd agreed on a price for a horse. We'll do it tomorrow. Pastor Whitfield can perform the ceremony. Tomorrow? Her heart lurched. That's so fast. No point waiting. Winter's coming, and the road north won't be passable much longer. He stood up. I'll arrange everything. You just say your goodbyes. He left her sitting there, surrounded by the noise of the saloon and the weight of what she'd just agreed to. Tomorrow. She was getting married tomorrow to a man she'd spoken to twice. Eliza Hart, what have you done? The wedding was brief and joyless, conducted in Pastor Whitfield's small church with 4 witnesses. Her father, carried there by 2 men Rowan had hired, Mrs. Patterson from the saloon, the pastor's wife, and a lawyer from the next town over who'd brought the contracts. Eliza wore her mother's old dress, the good one saved for special occasions, now yellow with age and moth-eaten in places she'd tried to hide with careful stitching. Rowan wore the same clothes she'd seen him in before, nothing special, nothing new. The ceremony took maybe 10 minutes. The words washed over her like water, promises made to a stranger about a future she couldn't imagine. When Pastor Whitfield said, "You may kiss the bride," Rowan leaned down and pressed his lips to hers for exactly 2 seconds, perfunctory and businesslike. Her first kiss, wasted on a transaction. After the ceremony, they signed the papers. The lawyer explained each one in detail: the marriage certificate, the debt payment agreement, the transfer of funds. Eliza tried to follow along, but the words kept sliding away from her. All she could focus on was the stack of bills the lawyer counted out onto the table: $347 for James Crawford, $500 for her, and an additional $300 for her father's care. More money than she'd ever seen. More money than most people in Clearwater saw in years. "It's done," the lawyer said, gathering up the signed documents. "Congratulations." The word felt obscene. Eliza spent the rest of the day with her father, sitting beside his bed, while Rowan arranged supplies and horses for their journey. Thomas was in good spirits, better than he'd been in weeks. The money for his care had already worked magic. Doc Warren had come by with medicine that actually helped. And Mrs. Patterson was being paid to move into the cabin and look after him full time. "You don't have to worry about me anymore," her father said, gripping her hand. "Focus on your new life." "I don't even know what my new life is." "Then you get to make it whatever you want." He smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him in months. "That's a gift, in its own way. Most people don't get to start over." She wanted to believe him, but starting over sounded like freedom, and what she'd just done felt more like a trade. One prison for another, even if this one came with better food and warmer walls. That night, Eliza lay awake in the cabin for the last time, listening to her father's breathing in the other room and Mrs. Patterson's soft snoring from the corner pallet. Tomorrow she'd leave this place forever. These thin walls, this leaking roof, this hard life, they'd defined her whole existence. She tried to imagine the future and found only blankness. What did Rowan's Valley look like? What kind of house had he built? Would he be kind to her, or had she just sold herself to a prettier kind of hell? The questions spun through her mind until exhaustion finally dragged her down into restless sleep. Dawn came cold and gray. Eliza packed her few possessions, her mother's brush and mirror. She'd gotten them back from the general store owner, who'd returned them without charge when he heard about the wedding. 2 changes of clothes, a book of poems, and a small wooden horse her father had carved for her when she was 6. Everything she owned fit into one saddlebag. Rowan was waiting outside with 3 horses, one for him, one for her, and one loaded with supplies. He'd arranged for someone to take Bess to a farm where she'd be cared for. Even that small kindness made Eliza's throat tight. "Ready?" he asked. "No, not even close." "Yes," she said. Her father came to the door, leaning on Mrs. Patterson for support. He looked stronger already, or maybe it was just hope giving him temporary energy. "You take care of my girl," Thomas said to Rowan. "I will." "And Eliza," her father's voice cracked, "you come visit me, soon as the snow clears." She couldn't speak, couldn't push words past the lump in her throat. She just nodded and threw her arms around him, memorizing the feel of his embrace, the smell of tobacco and sickness and home. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." She pulled away before she could start crying and climbed onto her horse with shaking hands. Rowan mounted his own horse smoothly, like he'd been born in a saddle. "Let's go," he said. They rode out of the valley as the sun broke through the clouds, turning the snow golden. Eliza looked back once, seeing the cabin growing smaller behind them, her father a dark figure in the doorway. Then Rowan led them around a bend in the trail, and the cabin disappeared. She was married now, Mrs. Rowan Hale. The name felt foreign in her mind, like words in a language she didn't speak. The trail north was rough and climbing, cutting through pine forests and across streams swollen with early snowmelt. Rowan set a steady pace, not fast but not slow either, like a man who knew exactly where he was going and how long it would take. They didn't talk much that first day. Eliza was too lost in her own head, and Rowan seemed content with silence. When they stopped to water the horses, he'd ask if she needed anything: water, food, rest, and she'd shake her head, and they'd continue on. It was almost like traveling alone, except for the solid presence of him ahead of her, broad-shouldered and sure in the saddle. Night fell fast in the mountains. Rowan found them a sheltered spot under an overhang of rock, where they'd be protected from wind and hidden from the trail. He built a fire with practiced efficiency and unpacked supplies: dried meat, hardtack, coffee. "We'll make better time tomorrow," he said, handing her a tin cup of coffee so hot it burned her fingers. "Weather's supposed to hold." "How do you know?" "Sky's clear. Wind's from the south. And my knee doesn't ache, which means no storm coming." He settled across the fire from her, his face half in shadow. "I broke it years ago. Never healed right. Better than a barometer now." It was the first personal thing he'd told her. She filed it away with the other scraps of information she was collecting. He moved like he'd been hurt before. He knew the mountains. He played complicated card games. His knee predicted weather. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask. Doesn't mean I'll answer." "Why didn't you just hire a wife from one of the agencies? They've got plenty of women back east looking to come west." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks floating up into the darkness. "I tried that once." "What happened?" "She took one look at where I was living and got back on the train." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Didn't even last a full day. Told me I was crazy if I thought she was going to rot away in the middle of nowhere." "That must have been expensive." "The train ticket? Yeah. The lesson? Worth every penny." He looked at her across the flames. "That's why I needed someone from here. Someone who already knows what hard looks like. City women think the West is some romantic adventure. They don't realize it's mostly just cold and work and things trying to kill you." "You're real good at selling this," Eliza said dryly. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You already married me. Too late to back out now." They finished their meal in silence. When Rowan started unpacking the bedrolls, Eliza's stomach clenched, but he set them up on opposite sides of the fire, his closer to the trail, hers against the rock wall. "You sleep," he said. "I'll take first watch." "Watch for what?" "Bears, mountain lions, anything else that might think we look like dinner." He pulled out a rifle she hadn't noticed before. "Don't worry, I'm a light sleeper." Eliza lay down at the bedroll, staring up at the stars visible through the tree branches. The fire crackled. The horses shifted and breathed nearby. Rowan sat with his back against a tree, rifle across his knees, just a dark shape against the night. She wondered if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. She wondered if she'd made the only choice that mattered. She wondered when she'd stop wondering and just accept what was done. Sleep took her eventually, pulling her down into dreams of falling off cliffs and trying to grab onto rocks that crumbled in her hands. The second day was harder. The trail grew steeper, rockier, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through sections where one wrong step meant a long drop into nothing. Eliza's legs burned. Her hands were raw from gripping the reins. The thin air made every breath feel insufficient. Rowan didn't slow down. He just kept going, steady and relentless as erosion. "How much further?" she asked when they stopped for a brief rest. "We'll be there by nightfall tomorrow." Another full day. Eliza wasn't sure she could make it. Every muscle in her body was screaming. She'd grown up working hard, but this was different. This was mountain hard, altitude hard, the kind of hard that made you understand why people died out here. "You're doing good," Rowan said, and the surprise of praise made her look up. He was watching her with something that might have been respect. "Most people would have complained by now. Most people probably married someone they'd known longer than 2 days. Fair point." He offered her his canteen. "Drink more than you think you need. Altitude dehydration sneaks up on you." She drank, tasting metal and mountain water. "You know a lot about these mountains." "I've spent time in them." "Doing what?" "Various things." He took the canteen back and drank himself, his throat working. "I wasn't always living in a valley building a house, if that's what you're asking." "What were you doing?" He looked at her for a long moment like he was deciding something. "Working, learning, trying to figure out what I wanted from life." He capped the canteen. "Turns out what I wanted was space, distance from certain things, a place where nobody knew my name or my history or what I was supposed to be." "That sounds lonely." It was. "That's why I need a wife." He said it simply, without self-pity. "I don't want to die alone in those mountains without leaving something behind, even if it's just one other person who knows I existed." The honesty of it hit her sideways. She'd been thinking of this as a practical arrangement, a survival strategy. She hadn't considered that maybe Rowan was surviving too, in his own way. Running from his own version of James Crawford and winter and death. "What are you running from?" she asked. "Same thing everyone runs from, the person they were before." He stood up, brushing dirt from his pants. "Come on, we lose daylight, we lose warmth." They continued climbing. The trees thinned out. The trail became less of a trail and more of a suggestion carved into the mountainside. Eliza focused on putting one foot in front of the other, not looking down, not thinking about how high up they were or how far they could fall. That night they camped above the tree line, exposed to wind that cut through every layer of clothing. Rowan built the fire in a depression between rocks, trying to trap the heat. It barely helped. "This is the worst part," he said, seeing her shivering. "Tomorrow we drop back down into the valley. It'll be warmer. If we don't freeze first." "We won't freeze." He pulled out an extra blanket from his pack and handed it to her. "And if we do, at least we'll freeze together. That's what marriage is, right? Shared suffering?" She laughed despite herself. It came out as more of a hiccup. That night, Rowan put their bedrolls closer together, near enough that she could feel the heat from his body across the small gap. Not touching, but close enough to share warmth. "This doesn't count as breaking your rule," he said quietly. "I'm just trying to keep us alive." "I know." She lay there in the darkness, listening to the wind howl around the rocks and Rowan's steady breathing beside her. For the first time since the wedding, she felt something other than fear or regret. She felt like maybe they were a team. Even if it was a team formed out of desperation and convenience, it was still something. It was more than she'd had before. The third day started with the most beautiful sunrise Eliza had ever seen. The sky turned pink and gold and purple, colors she didn't have names for, painting the peaks around them like they were on fire. "It's something, isn't it?" Rowan said, standing beside her, hands in his pockets. "I've never seen anything like it." That's what I meant about needing someone from out here. City people see this and think it's pretty. Mountain people see it and understand what it costs. He glanced at her. The beauty only exists because of how hard everything else is. They began the descent into the valley around mid-morning. The trail switched back down the side of a ridge, giving Eliza glimpses of what lay below: green meadows, a silver thread of river, dark forests climbing the far slopes. And in the center of it all, where the valley widened out like a cupped hand, she saw buildings. Not just a cabin. Buildings. Plural. "What is that?" she asked, pulling her horse up short. Rowan stopped beside her. His face was carefully neutral. "Home." As they got closer, Eliza's confusion grew into something approaching shock. This wasn't a homestead. This was... She didn't know what this was. There was a main house, big, 2 stories, actual windows with glass, surrounded by smaller structures. Barns, stables, storage buildings, a bunkhouse maybe. The whole complex was built from logs and stone, solid and permanent, like it had grown up out of the earth itself. "You said you were building a place," she said slowly. "I am. It's not finished yet." "Rowan, this is an estate." He didn't deny it, just kept riding down toward the valley floor, his face set in lines she couldn't read. They reached the main house as the sun was reaching its peak. Up close, it was even more impressive. Carefully crafted, with real foundations and a stone chimney and carved details around the doorway. The kind of place that took serious money and serious time to build. A man came out of this barn as they rode up, wiping his hands on his pants. He was older, maybe 50, with weathered skin and a cautious expression. "Boss?" he said, nodding at Rowan. Then his eyes went to Eliza. "Ma'am?" "Thomas, this is my wife, Eliza." Rowan dismounted and helped her down from her horse. "Eliza, Thomas manages the property when I'm away." Manages the property. Like this was a business, not a home. "Pleased to meet you," Thomas said, though his expression suggested he wasn't sure what to make of her. "Get the horses settled," Rowan said, "and have Marie prepare the main bedroom. My wife's had a long journey." Thomas nodded and led the horses away. Rowan turned to Eliza, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. "I know this is more than you expected," he said. "More?" She laughed, high and strange. "Rowan, you told me you were building a place in the mountains. This is a compound. There are multiple buildings. You have employees." "2 employees, Thomas and his wife Marie. They help maintain things." "Maintain what? What is all this?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Can we go inside? I'll explain everything." The interior of the house matched the exterior. Well built, well furnished, far beyond what any normal settler could afford. Real furniture, not homemade. Rugs on the floor, books on shelves, a kitchen with an actual stove, not just a fireplace. Eliza turned in a slow circle, trying to process it. "Who are you?" "I told you, Rowan Hale." "That's a name. It's not an answer." She faced him, anger cutting through the exhaustion. "You let me think you were just some man trying to start over. You let me think this was going to be a cabin and some land, maybe a garden plot. You didn't tell me you were—" She gestured around them. "Whatever this is." "I'm not whatever you're imagining." He moved to the fireplace where wood was already laid ready to light. "This isn't some secret palace. It's just a house. Just a house with staff. Just a house that probably cost more than my entire town." She felt tears prickling at her eyes and hated herself for it. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted you to marry me for the right reasons." "The right reasons? I married you to pay my father's debts." "Exactly." He turned to face her. "You married me because you needed help, not because I have money. You married me because it was practical, not because you wanted to climb some social ladder. That's what I needed. Someone who'd be here for honest reasons." "There's nothing honest about lying by omission." "I didn't lie. I just didn't volunteer information you didn't ask for." "That's semantics. It's the truth." His voice rose for the first time, matching her volume. I've had enough women interested in me because of money. I wanted someone who'd say yes, even if I was poor. And you did. You saw me as just another man trying to survive. And you still agreed. That meant something. Eliza stared at him, her mind racing. Part of her understood what he was saying, but the larger part felt manipulated, tricked into a situation she hadn't agreed to. I need to know who you really are, she said quietly. Not the version you showed me, the truth. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, firelight painting shadows across his face. Finally, he spoke. My full name is Rowan Matthew Hale. My family owns timber rights to most of the mountains in this region. My father and brothers run one of the biggest timber operations west of the Mississippi. I'm what you might call the spare heir, the one who was supposed to stand around looking respectable and marry well and produce children to carry on the family name. He said it all flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a report. I didn't want that life. So I left. Took some money I'd saved, my own money, earned from working the camps, and came out here to build something that was mine. Not my father's legacy, not my family's empire, just mine. And your family's okay with that? His laugh was bitter. My family's very much not okay with that, but they can't force me back. I'm over 21, and I didn't take anything I wasn't entitled to, so they're stuck with a son who walked away from everything they built. Eliza sank down onto a chair, her legs giving out. So you are rich. By some definitions, yes. By others, no. The money in this valley is mine, but it's not infinite. I'm living off what I saved, and when that runs out, I'll need to make this place profitable. Doing what? Selective timber harvesting. Careful, sustainable. Not the way my father does it, clear-cutting entire mountains. I want to prove there's another way. His voice gained intensity, real passion breaking through the careful control. There has to be another way. Something that doesn't just destroy everything for profit. She heard the conviction in his words, the genuine belief. This wasn't just about running away. He was running towards something, building something he thought mattered. It should have made her feel better. Instead, it made her feel small. I'm just a farm girl from a failed homestead, she said. What am I supposed to do in all this? Play dress up and pretend I belong? Rowan crossed to her and knelt down so they were eye level. You're going to do exactly what you've always done. Survive, adapt, make things work. That's why I chose you, Eliza. Not because you'd fit some image. Because you wouldn't quit when things got complicated. Things are already complicated. I know, and we'll figure it out. He took her hands carefully, like he was holding something fragile. I know I should have told you everything up front. I know this is a lot to take in, but I meant what I said. I need you here. Not as decoration, as a partner. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that this could work, that she hadn't just traded one impossible situation for another. But trust was hard when the foundation you'd built it on turned out to be shifted sand. I need time, she said, to think, to understand what all this means. Take all the time you need. He stood up, releasing her hands. Marie will show you to your room. We keep separate bedrooms. You'll have your own space, your own privacy. Whatever you need. He left her there in the big, beautiful house that was nothing like anything she'd imagined, sitting in a chair that probably cost more than her father's entire cabin, wondering if she'd escaped her trap or just found a more comfortable cage. Outside, the Colorado sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and shadow. And Eliza Hart, no, Eliza Hale now, sat in the gathering darkness and tried to figure out what happened next, because this was just the beginning. And something told her the hard part was still coming. Marie turned out to be a round woman in her 60s with flour permanently dusted on her apron and eyes that saw too much. She showed Eliza to a bedroom on the second floor without saying much beyond "this way" and bathrooms down the hall. The room was larger than the entire cabin Eliza had grown up in. A real bed with a quilt that looked handmade. A wardrobe. A desk by the window overlooking the valley. A washstand with an actual porcelain basin. Mr. Hale said you'd need some things, Marie said, opening the wardrobe to reveal dresses hanging inside. I took a guess at your size. If they don't fit, I can adjust them. Eliza walked over and touched one of the dresses. Simple cotton, nothing fancy, but new, clean. Hers. You didn't have to do this. Didn't do it for free. He pays me. Marie's voice was gruff, but not unkind. Dinner's at 6. You want something before then? Kitchen's downstairs. Help yourself. She left, closing the door behind her with a firm click. Eliza stood in the middle of the room, feeling like an actress who'd walked onto the wrong stage. Everything here was too nice, too clean, too far removed from the life she knew. She caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the washstand, dirty from 3 days of travel, hair falling out of its braid, her mother's old dress stained with sweat and dust. She looked like exactly what she was, a poor girl playing dress-up in a rich man's house. The anger that had been building since they'd arrived finally cracked open. She grabbed the porcelain basin and hurled it against the wall. It shattered with a satisfying crash, pieces scattering across the wood floor like snow. The door flew open. Rowan stood there, eyes wide, taking in the broken porcelain, and Eliza standing in the middle of it, breathing hard. "Feel better?" he asked. "No. Want to break something else?" "Maybe." He stepped into the room, careful to avoid the shards. The wardrobe's oak probably hurt your hand. The mirror's small, but it'd make a good sound. Or there's a vase downstairs that Marie hates. You'd actually be doing her a favor. Despite everything, Eliza felt a laugh bubble up in her throat. It came out wet and angry. "Stop being reasonable. I'm trying to be mad at you." "You have every right to be mad." He leaned against the doorframe. "I did manipulate you, not maliciously, but the result's the same. You married one person and got someone else entirely. So what do I do now? We're legally married. I can't just leave." "You could." His voice was quiet. "I wouldn't stop you. I'd give you money, help you get wherever you wanted to go. Your father's care would continue. That was never conditional on you staying." She stared at him. "You're serious?" "Completely. I want you here, Eliza, but not if you're miserable, not if you feel trapped." He pushed off the doorframe. "Think about it. Sleep on it. Whatever you decide, I'll support it." He left her alone with the broken porcelain and the impossible choice. That night, Eliza lay in the too-soft bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her. She thought about leaving. Imagined taking the money Rowan offered and starting over somewhere new. Maybe going back east where nobody knew her, where she could reinvent herself completely. But then what? She'd still be alone. Still be a woman with limited options in a world that didn't care much about women like her. At least here she had, what? A husband who'd lied to her? A house that felt like a museum? A future she couldn't picture? Or maybe she had a chance, a real chance at something more than survival. She fell asleep without deciding, and her dreams were full of broken things she couldn't put back together. Morning came with weak sunlight filtering through the curtains. Eliza woke disoriented, forgetting for a moment where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The wedding, the journey, the revelation. She got out of bed and looked at the mess she'd made the night before. The broken basin seemed smaller in daylight, less dramatic. Just pottery in pieces, waiting for someone to clean it up. She got dressed in one of the new dresses. It fit almost perfectly, which meant Marie had a good eye, and went downstairs. The kitchen was empty except for coffee on the stove and fresh bread on the counter. A note in rough handwriting said, "Help yourself, M." Eliza poured coffee and stood at the window, watching the valley wake up. Mist hung in the low places. Birds she couldn't name called to each other in the trees. In the distance, she could see Thomas working near one of the outbuildings, methodical and unhurried. "You're up early." She turned to find Rowan in the doorway, his hair wet like he'd just washed. He looked tired, like maybe he hadn't slept much either. "Couldn't sleep past dawn," she said. "Old habits?" He nodded and poured his own coffee. They stood there in awkward silence, two people who were married but barely knew each other, trying to figure out what happened next. "I broke your basin," Eliza said finally. "I heard. I'll pay for it. Don't worry about it. I've broken worse in worse moods." He took a sip of coffee. "Have you decided? About staying?" She had somewhere in the sleepless hours of the night. It wasn't a happy decision or even a confident one, but it was hers. "I'll stay," she said, "but on new terms. I'm listening. I'm not going to be some decorative wife who sits around looking pretty. If I'm here, I'm working. I need something to do, something that matters. What do you want to do? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. She set down her coffee cup. And you're going to tell me everything about your family, about the business, about why you really left. No more secrets. Agreed. And I want to visit my father soon. I need to know he's okay. We can go next week if the weather holds. She studied his face, looking for deception or hesitation. But he just looked relieved, like he'd been expecting worse. Okay then, she said. Okay then, he echoed. It wasn't exactly a fresh start, but it was something. The next few days fell into an uneasy rhythm. Eliza explored the property, trying to understand the scope of what Rowan had built. There were sections of forest marked with tags where he planned selective harvesting. A mill site partially constructed near the river. Sketches and plans spread across his office desk, showing expansion ideas, sustainability models, profit projections. He wasn't just playing at this. He was building an actual business. The key is rotation, he explained one afternoon, walking her through a marked section of forest. You never take more than 30% from any area. Give it time to regenerate before you come back. My father's operation takes everything, moves on, leaves dead mountains behind. I want to prove you can make money and still leave something standing. What if you're wrong? What if it's not profitable enough? Then I fail. He said it simply, like failure was just another possibility he'd accepted. But at least I'll have tried something different. Eliza found herself drawn into his plans despite her lingering anger. There was something compelling about his certainty, his willingness to bet everything on an idea most people would call naive. You need better record keeping, she said one evening, looking through his ledgers. You're tracking expenses but not categorizing them properly, and your inventory system is a mess. I'm better with trees than numbers. Then it's lucky you married someone who can add. She pulled out a clean ledger. Show me everything you've spent in the last 6 months. They spent the next 3 hours organizing his finances, and Eliza felt something shift inside her. This was work she understood, practical, necessary, the kind of thing that kept businesses alive. For the first time since arriving, she felt useful instead of decorative. You're good at this, Rowan said, watching her create neat columns of figures. My mother handled all our accounts. She taught me before she died. Eliza didn't look up from the page. Said every woman should know how to manage money, even if men pretend it's not proper. Your mother sounds like she was smart. She was. Not that it saved her. The old bitterness crept into her voice. Being smart doesn't matter much when you're poor and sick and the nearest doctor is 2 days away. Rowan was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry you lost her. Everyone loses people. That's just how life works. She closed the ledger. But thank you. It was the first real conversation they'd had, the first time they'd touched on anything personal beyond the practical details of their arrangement. It felt fragile, like ice that might crack if you stepped wrong, but it was something. A week after her arrival, they made the trip back to Clearwater to visit her father. The journey down the mountain was easier than the climb up had been. Eliza knew what to expect now, and her body had started adapting to the altitude and the work. They reached the cabin just before sunset. Mrs. Patterson met them at the door, wiping her hands on her apron. He's been asking after you, she said to Eliza. Every day. When's my girl coming back? Thomas Hart looked better than he had in months. The medicine was working, and regular meals had put some flesh back on his bones. He was sitting up in bed when Eliza came in, and his face lit up like sunrise. There she is, he said. Mrs. Hale. The name still sounded foreign, but Eliza didn't correct him. She sat beside the bed and took his hand. How are you feeling? Like a man who's not dying quite as fast as he thought. He squeezed her fingers. The new medicine Doc Warren brought is helping, and Marie, Mrs. Patterson, she makes a hell of a stew. Language, Mrs. Patterson called from the other room. Thomas grinned, looking more like his old self than Eliza had seen in years. Then his eyes went to Rowan, standing in the doorway. You treating her right? He asked. I'm trying to, Rowan said. That's not a yes. It's an honest answer. Rowan met the older man's gaze steadily. I'm not perfect, Mr. Hart, but I'm keeping my promises. Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I suppose that's all any of us can do. They stayed for dinner, eating Mrs. Patterson's stew at the small table while Thomas told stories from his bed. Stories about Eliza as a child, about her mother, about the early days when they'd first come to the valley full of hope and stupidity. "We thought we'd build something," he said, his voice getting tired. "Something that would last. Turns out all we built was a lesson in how hard the world can be." "You built more than that," Eliza said quietly. "You built me." Her father's eyes got wet. Yeah, I did. And you're the only thing I got right." When it was time to leave, Thomas pulled Eliza close. "You don't have to pretend it's perfect," he whispered. "Just make it work. That's all marriage is, two people deciding to make it work over and over every day." "I'm trying." "I know you are. You're your mother's daughter. You'll figure it out." The ride back up the mountain was quiet. Eliza felt the weight of her father's words, the responsibility of making this strange marriage into something real. She glanced at Rowan riding ahead of her, his shoulders set against the cold wind, and wondered if he felt the same pressure. "Thank you," she said when they stopped to rest the horses. "For what?" "For keeping your promise. About my father." She looked back the way they'd come, though the valley was long out of sight. "He looks better than I've seen him in years." "He's a fighter. Reminds me of you." "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation." Rowan handed her his canteen. "But yes, also a compliment." They made it back to the valley as snow began to fall. Real snow this time, not just flurries. The first storm of winter, right on schedule. Over the next few weeks, Eliza found her place in the household through sheer stubbornness. She took over the ledgers completely, reorganizing Rowan's chaotic bookkeeping into something functional. She started helping Marie with preserving food for winter, drawing on knowledge from her own lean years. She learned the property, memorizing trails and landmarks, understanding the layout of Rowan's planned operation. And slowly, carefully, she and Rowan learned each other. She discovered he was an early riser who liked his coffee strong and his mornings quiet, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, that he was actually terrible at cards despite playing them constantly. He just enjoyed the game itself. He learned she was fiercely private about her past, but generous with practical help, that she had a temper that flared hot and fast but didn't hold grudges, that she sang while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her, usually without realizing she was doing it. They existed in a strange middle ground, married but not intimate, partners but not quite friends, trying to build something neither of them had words for. One night in early November, a month after her arrival, Rowan knocked on her bedroom door. "There's something I need to tell you," he said when she answered. "Can we talk?" They went downstairs to his office, where a fire burned low in the hearth. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking if she wanted one and handed her one anyway. "My brother's coming," he said. Eliza felt her stomach drop. "When?" "Tomorrow, probably. Maybe the day after if the weather slows him down." Rowan drank half his whiskey in one swallow. "He sent a telegram to the town. Thomas picked it up this morning." "What does he want?" "To drag me back home, most likely. To lecture me about responsibility and family duty and throwing away my future." He refilled his glass. "Maybe to meet you." "Hard to say with Marcus. He's not exactly predictable." "You didn't tell them you got married." "I sent a letter. Guess they didn't believe it." He looked at her and she saw worry in his eyes for the first time since she'd met him. "Marcus he's going to be difficult. He's going to say things about you, about us, about this whole situation. I need you to be ready for that." "What kind of things?" "That you're a gold digger, that I've lost my mind, that this marriage isn't legitimate." He set down the glass hard enough to make a sound. "He's going to try to buy you off, offer you money to leave." Eliza felt anger kindle in her chest. "He doesn't even know me." "He doesn't need to. In his world, people like you exist to take advantage of people like us." The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. "That's how they see everyone outside their circle, as either tools or threats." "And you're okay with me meeting him?" "No. But I don't have a choice. If I refuse to see him, he'll just make things worse. Better to face it head on." Rowan met her eyes. "I'm asking you to trust me. Can you do that?" She thought about it, really thought about it. Trust was earned, and Rowan had broken hers with his initial deception. But he'd also been honest since then, had kept every promise, had treated her with more respect than she'd expected. "Yes," she said, "I can trust you." He looked relieved. "Thank you." "But, Rowan, if your brother tries to buy me off?" She smiled without humor. "I'm going to make him regret it. That's what I'm counting on." Marcus Hale arrived the next afternoon in a carriage that must have cost more than most people made in a year. He was taller than Rowan, broader in the shoulders, with the same dark hair, but eyes that were calculating where Rowan's were guarded. He took one look at the property and his face went cold. "So this is what you've been doing," he said, climbing down from the carriage. "Playing frontier businessman." "Marcus?" Rowan's voice was carefully neutral. "Long trip?" "Long enough to think about all the ways this is a terrible idea." Marcus's eyes found Eliza standing on the porch. "And you must be the wife." "Eliza Hale," she said, not moving from her spot. "Nice to meet you." "Is it?" He climbed the steps, looking her up and down like she was livestock he was considering purchasing. "Rowan didn't mention he'd married a local." "Rowan doesn't mention a lot of things to you, apparently." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "She's got spine. That's something, at least." "Come inside," Rowan said, his jaw tight. "Marie made lunch." The meal was excruciating. Marcus asked pointed questions about Eliza's background, her family, her education, each one designed to highlight how unsuitable she was. She answered them all honestly, refusing to be ashamed. "So your father was a failed farmer," Marcus said, cutting his meat with precise movements. "And you had no formal schooling past 8th grade, no connections, no prospects, and somehow you ended up married to my brother." "Somehow," Eliza agreed. "Must have seemed like quite the opportunity." "It seemed like survival." She met his eyes. "I married your brother because my father was dying and we were about to lose everything. Is that what you wanted to hear? That I needed the money? I'm not going to pretend otherwise." Marcus sat back, studying her. "At least you're honest about it." "I'm honest about most things." She took a deliberate bite of bread. "Unlike some people." Rowan made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. After lunch, the brothers went into the office alone. Eliza stayed in the kitchen with Marie, listening to their raised voices through the walls. "You can't possibly think this will work," Marcus was saying. "She's a nobody. When Father finds out, Father doesn't control my life anymore. He controls the money. Or have you forgotten that the fortune you're spending so freely came from his work? I earned my share. I worked those camps for 8 years, and now you're throwing it away on some fantasy about sustainable forestry and a wife who can barely read." The door slammed open. Eliza looked up to see Rowan standing there, his face flushed with anger. "Say one more word about her," he said quietly. "Just one more word." Marcus appeared behind him, straightening his jacket. "Fine. I'll say it to her directly." He looked at Eliza. "I'm prepared to offer you $10,000 to annul this marriage and disappear." The number was staggering. More money than Eliza could spend in 10 lifetimes. Enough to secure her father's care forever, to start over anywhere she wanted, to never worry about survival again. She stood up slowly. "No," she said. 20,000. "No." Marcus's expression flickered with surprise. "You're turning down $20,000? "I'm turning down you." Eliza walked around the table until she was close enough to see the calculation in his eyes. "You think everyone has a price. You think because I'm poor, I'll jump at whatever you offer. But here's what you don't understand. I already made my choice. I married your brother, and I don't go back on my word." "How noble. I'm sure that nobility will keep you warm when this whole venture collapses." "Maybe it will. Maybe it won't." She crossed her arms. "But at least I'll know I tried something real instead of just spending my life protecting money I didn't earn." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Marcus looked at his brother. "She's either the smartest woman I've ever met or the dumbest. I can't tell which." "Neither can I," Rowan said. "But she's staying." "Fine." Marcus picked up his coat. "But when this falls apart, and it will fall apart, don't come crying to Father for help. You made your bed. Now you get to lie in it." He left in the same expensive carriage he'd arrived in, kicking up dust as he disappeared down the mountain road. Rowan stood in the doorway, watching until the carriage was out of sight. Then he turned to Eliza. "You could have taken the money," he said. "I know." "Why didn't you?" She thought about how to answer that. The truth was complicated, part pride, part stubbornness, part a growing sense that maybe, just maybe, she was building something here worth protecting. "Because he was wrong," she said finally. "About you, about me, about all of it, and I wanted him to know he was wrong." Rowan crossed the room and, without asking permission, pulled her into a hug. It was the first time they'd touched beyond the necessary, helping her off a horse, steadying her on rough trail, the perfunctory wedding kiss. This was different. This was real. "Thank you," he said into her hair, "for standing with me." Eliza let herself lean into him just for a moment, feeling the solid warmth of him. That's what marriage is, right? Standing together when things get hard? "I think so." He pulled back, his hands on her shoulders, looking at her with something new in his eyes. "I think that's exactly what it is." That night, winter hit the valley hard. Snow fell in thick sheets, burying everything under white silence. Eliza stood at her bedroom window, watching the world disappear, and felt something shift inside her. She'd come here as a desperate girl with no choices. But somewhere in the last month, she'd started becoming someone else. Someone who could face down rich men and keep her own books and stand beside her husband without flinching. Someone who was maybe, possibly, actually building a life. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. It wasn't the romance from storybooks or the adventure she dreamed of as a child. It was stranger and harder and more complicated than any of that. But it was hers, and for now, that was enough. The snow continued falling through the night, and by morning, the valley was transformed into something from a dream, beautiful and harsh and absolutely unforgiving. Eliza woke to find Rowan already up, talking with Thomas about clearing paths and checking on the livestock. She got dressed and went downstairs, moving into the work of the day without thinking about it. This was survival, the thing she knew how to do, the thing she was good at. And if she was going to survive here, she'd do it the same way she'd survived everywhere else, by being too stubborn to quit and too practical to fail, by making it work. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one small victory at a time. Until this strange marriage became something real. Until this valley became home. Winter locked the valley in ice for 3 months, and in that frozen time, Eliza learned what it meant to be married to a man with a target on his back. The letter came in February, delivered by a rider who'd nearly died getting through the mountain passes. Rowan read it standing by the fire, his face going carefully blank in the way she'd learned meant trouble. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the letter without speaking. It was from his father, written in sharp, efficient handwriting that looked like it could cut paper. "Your mother is ill. She's asking for you. Come home immediately. Bring the girl if you must, but come alone if you have any sense. We need to discuss your future and the damage you've done to this family's reputation." The girl. Not even her name. "Are you going?" Eliza asked, handing the letter back. "I have to. If my mother's actually sick—" He stopped, rubbing his face. "She might be. Or this might be a trap to get me back there. With my father, you never know." "Then I'm coming with you." "Eliza, I'm your wife. If this is a trap, you need someone watching your back. If it's real, you need support." She crossed her arms. "Either way, I'm coming." He looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. "It's going to be bad. My family, they're not like Marcus, they're worse. I survived your brother trying to buy me off. I think I can handle dinner conversation." "This won't be dinner conversation. This will be a coordinated attack designed to break us apart." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "They're going to try to prove you're unsuitable. They're going to offer you money, threaten legal action, maybe even try to find dirt on your past to use against you. And they'll do it all with smiles and perfect manners." Sounds delightful. "I'm serious, Eliza. These people destroy things for sport, and they see our marriage as something that needs to be destroyed." She walked over to him and took the letter from his hands, reading it again. The words were polite, but the subtext was clear. "Come home and fix this mess you've made, or we'll fix it for you." "When do we leave?" she asked. They departed 4 days later as soon as the weather cleared enough to make the journey possible. The trip to Denver took a week, down out of the mountains, across frozen plains, finally into the sprawling city that seemed to grow bigger every year. Eliza had never seen anything like it. Buildings 3 and 4 stories tall, paved streets, electric lights starting to appear on corners. More people in one block than lived in all of Clearwater. The noise and smell and sheer density of it all made her head spin. "Stay close," Rowan said as their carriage navigated through traffic. "It's easy to get lost here." The Hale family mansion sat in the wealthy district, a 3-story monument to timber money and social ambition. It made Rowan's Valley house look like a cabin. Eliza stared at it through the carriage window, feeling her stomach clench. "I don't belong here," she said quietly. "Neither do I. That's why I left." He squeezed her hand briefly. "Just remember, they only have power if you give it to them." The butler who answered the door looked at Eliza like she'd tracked mud on his floor. "Mr. Rowan, your father is in his study. He said to send you directly." "And my mother?" "Resting upstairs. She's had one of her spells," which could mean anything from a genuine illness to a headache she was using for dramatic effect. Rowan's jaw tightened, but he just nodded. "Eliza comes with me," he said. The butler's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Your father specifically said—" "I don't care what my father said. My wife comes with me." They were shown to a study that looked like it existed to intimidate people. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture, walls lined with books that probably cost more than Eliza's father's entire property. Behind a massive desk sat a man who looked like Rowan might in 30 years. Same build, same dark hair going gray, but with eyes that held nothing but cold calculation. William Hale didn't stand when they entered. "So you actually married her," he said, looking past Rowan to Eliza. "I half thought Marcus was exaggerating." "Father, this is my wife, Eliza." Rowan's voice was controlled, careful. "Eliza, my father, William Hale." "Mr. Hale," Eliza said, not offering her hand since he hadn't offered his. "Sit down, both of you. We need to talk about this situation you've created." "There's no situation," Rowan said, but he sat. Eliza took the chair beside him, very aware of William's eyes cataloging every detail about her. Her simple dress, her work-roughened hands, the way she didn't quite know how to sit in furniture this expensive. "No situation." William's laugh was harsh. "You disappear for 6 months, marry some nobody from a failed homestead, and start playing lumber baron in the mountains. And you think there's no situation? I got married and started a business. That's not a crime. It's a disaster waiting to happen. Do you have any idea what the investors are saying? What our competitors are using this for?" He pulled out a newspaper and threw it across the desk. "Read that." The headline said, "Timber Heir Abandons Empire for Mountain Fantasy." The article was worse, speculating about Rowan's mental state, questioning his business acumen, suggesting the marriage was a sign of breakdown or rebellion. "Let them talk," Rowan said. "I don't care." "Well, I care. This company has a reputation. This company destroys mountains and treats workers like expendable equipment. Forgive me if I'm not concerned about its reputation." The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. William stood up slowly, his hands flat on the desk. "Everything you have came from this company. Every opportunity, every advantage, every dollar in your pocket, all of it came from the work I did building this empire. And now you want to lecture me about how I run it? I want nothing from you." Rowan stood too, matching his father's posture. "I took my share, money I earned working your camps for 8 years, and I left. That's the end of it. It's not the end when you're still using the Hale name, when your failure reflects on all of us. Then I'll stop using the name. Eliza and I can be the hearts for all I care." Eliza felt something warm bloom in her chest at the casual way he said it, like becoming part of her family instead of his was the most natural thing in the world. William's eyes narrowed. "You're serious about this?" "Completely." "Then you're a fool." He sat back down, all business again. "But you're my fool, apparently. So here's what's going to happen. You'll come back to work for the company in a limited capacity, nothing major. You'll move back to Denver, and He gestured at Eliza like she was furniture. "She can stay in your mountain hideaway if she wants. We'll arrange separate residences. That way everyone saves face. No, Rowan said. This isn't a negotiation. You're right. It's not. Rowan took Eliza's hand, pulling her to her feet. We're leaving. If you walk out that door, you're cut off, completely. No more money, no more name, no more family. Good. I never wanted your money anyway. They made it halfway to the door before William played his final card. Your mother's dying. Rowan stopped. The doctors give her 6 months, maybe less. She wants to see you settled before she goes. She wants to know the family will continue. William's voice had lost its edge, replaced by something that might have been genuine grief. That's not a manipulation, son. That's the truth. Rowan's hand tightened on Eliza's. She could feel him trembling, caught between loyalty and love, anger and obligation. I want to see her, he said finally. Now. Caroline Hale was everything William wasn't, warm where he was cold, gentle where he was harsh. She sat propped up in an elaborate bed, pale but smiling when Rowan and Eliza entered. There's my wandering boy, she said, her voice weak but genuine. Come here. Rowan went to her like a child, kneeling beside the bed and taking her thin hand. Eliza hung back, not wanting to intrude on the moment. And you must be Eliza, Caroline said, looking past Rowan. Come closer, dear. Let me see the woman who finally got my stubborn son to settle down. Eliza approached cautiously. Up close, she could see the illness in Caroline's face, the hollowness under her eyes, the gray tinge to her skin, the effort each breath took. Mrs. Hale, she said quietly. Call me Caroline. We're family now. She patted the bed beside her. Sit. Tell me how you managed to catch him. I didn't catch him. He caught me. Eliza sat carefully, very aware this was a test of some kind. Offered to pay my father's debts in exchange for marriage. How romantic, Caroline said, but there was amusement in her eyes, not judgment. And here I thought only people in novels did things like that. Turns out desperate people do too. Desperate or practical? Both, probably. Caroline laughed, then coughed, the sound wet and painful. Rowan reached for water, but she waved him off. I'm fine, just old lungs giving up. She focused on Eliza again. My husband thinks you're unsuitable. Marcus thinks you're a gold digger. What do you think you are? The directness caught Eliza off guard, but she respected it more than the careful politeness everyone else had offered. I think I'm someone trying to survive who got lucky enough to marry someone decent. She met Caroline's eyes. I won't pretend I love your son. We barely know each other, but I respect him, and I'm trying to build something real with him. Honesty, how refreshing. Caroline shifted in the bed, grimacing. Most women who marry into this family spend their whole lives lying about what they feel. It's exhausting to watch. Mother, Rowan started. Hush. I'm allowed to be honest when I'm dying. She looked between them. I like her, Rowan. She's got backbone. That's more important than breeding or money or any of the other things your father obsesses over. Then tell him that. Make him leave us alone. Your father doesn't listen to me anymore. He stopped listening years ago, around the time he decided the business was more important than anything else. Sadness flickered across her face. But I can do one thing for you. She reached for a drawer in the bedside table, pulling out a thick envelope. This is my inheritance from my father, separate from your father's money, kept in my name. $50,000 in bonds and stock. I'm giving it to you both. Rowan shook his head. Mother, no. Yes, you'll need it for your business, and this way it's clean. Nothing from William, nothing that comes with strings. She pressed the envelope into his hands. Use it wisely. Build something that matters. And take care of each other. Tears were running down Rowan's face now. Eliza felt her own eyes burning. Thank you, she said, because Rowan couldn't seem to get the words out. Don't thank me yet. This money comes with a price. Caroline's grip tightened on Rowan's hand. You're going to stay in Denver for 3 months. What? No. Listen to me. William's planning something. I don't know what yet, but I know him. He's going to try to destroy your business, ruin your reputation, make it impossible for you to succeed. Her voice was urgent now, pushing past the pain. The only way to stop him is to be here. Show him you're serious. Show the investors and business partners that you're not some flighty child having a breakdown. I don't care what they think, but Eliza should care. Caroline looked at her. Because if they destroy Rowan's credibility, they destroy everything you're both building. They'll make sure no bank loans him money, no supplier sells him equipment, no buyer purchases his timber. They'll strangle you slowly until you have no choice but to come crawling back. The room went quiet except for Caroline's labored breathing. Eliza felt the weight of what was being said, the reality of fighting people with this much power and reach. "What do you suggest?" she asked. "Stay. Attend the social functions. Meet the investors. Show them that Rowan's not crazy, that his business is legitimate, that you're not some scheming wife bleeding him dry." Caroline coughed again. "Play their game just long enough to secure your position. Then go back to your mountains and never look back." "Mother, you're asking Eliza to subject herself to people who are going to be cruel. I'm asking her to fight for what's yours." Caroline's eyes blazed with sudden intensity. "Do you think I didn't face the same thing? I was a nobody too before I married your father. They tried to destroy me, humiliate me, drive me away. I survived by being tougher than they expected." She looked at Eliza. "Can you do that?" Eliza thought about everything that had brought her here. Her father dying, the debts, the impossible choice that had seemed like the end but turned into a beginning. She thought about Marcus offering her $20,000 to leave, and how she'd refused because walking away wasn't who she was. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." Rowan looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Eliza, you don't have to—" "Your mother's right. If we run now, they win. They'll make sure we fail, and then everything we've built means nothing." She stood up, squaring her shoulders. "So we stay. We play their game. And we win." Caroline smiled, tired but triumphant. "Oh, Rowan, you definitely married the right woman." The next 3 months were the hardest of Eliza's life, harder even than watching her mother die or her father waste away or the desperate winters in the cabin. Because this wasn't physical hardship. This was warfare with smiles and poisoned compliments and traps disguised as opportunities. William immediately put them to work. Rowan was given a token position at the company, overseeing some minor contracts, attending meetings, doing just enough to be visible. It was humiliating work for someone who'd been running his own operation, but he did it without complaint. Eliza's role was worse. She was expected to socialize with the wives and daughters of Denver's elite, attending teas and luncheons and charity functions where every conversation was a minefield. The women circled her like sharks who'd smelled blood. "So, you're from Clearwater, Mrs. That," Brennan said at her first tea, stirring sugar into her cup with precise movements. "I'm not familiar with it." "It's small," Eliza said. "Barely a town, really." "How charming. And your family, what did they do there?" "Farming. Unsuccessfully, as it turned out." The women exchanged glances. Mrs. Brennan's smile sharpened. "How honest of you to admit it. Most people in your position would try to embellish." "I'm not most people." "No, you certainly aren't." Mrs. Carson joined the conversation, her tone syrupy sweet. "It must be quite overwhelming, suddenly being thrust into Denver society, so different from, what did you call it? A failed farm?" Eliza took a sip of tea, using the moment to control her temper. These women wanted her to react, to prove she didn't belong. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "It is different," she agreed. "Back home, people said what they meant. Here, everyone seems to prefer talking in circles. It's less efficient, but I suppose it passes the time." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Then Mrs. Brennan laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise even her. "Well, at least she's entertaining." It was a small victory, but Eliza learned to take them where she could find them. The real battle happened at the investor dinner 2 weeks into their stay. William had arranged it specifically to showcase Rowan's return to the fold, a way of reassuring the business partners that the wayward son was back under control. Eliza wore a dress Caroline had insisted on buying her, simple but expensive, that made her look like she almost belonged. She'd practiced with Caroline all week. Which fork to use, how to make small talk, the art of steering conversations without seeming to. "Remember," Caroline had said during their last practice session, These men respect strength. Don't apologize for who you are. Don't defer. They already think you're beneath them. Surprise them by not caring. The dinner was held at the mansion, with 20 of the most powerful men in Colorado timber and their wives. Eliza sat beside Rowan, trying not to feel like she was on display. The conversation started out safe. Business talk, market conditions, the usual. Then Walter Harrison, one of the senior investors, turned his attention to their end of the table. So Rowan, this sustainable forestry idea of yours, you're planning to make money while cutting less timber? His tone suggested this was impossible. That's the plan, Rowan said evenly. Seems inefficient. Why would anyone pay more for your timber when they can get it cheaper from operations that don't waste time trying to save trees? Because eventually there won't be any trees left to cut. We're destroying entire forests, turning mountains into wastelands. That's not sustainable. It's suicide. That's also not our problem, Harrison said. Our job is to maximize profit, not worry about what happens 50 years from now. What happens 50 years from now is your children have no forest left to log, no business left to inherit. Rowan's voice was controlled but intense. I'm trying to build something that lasts. You're trying to build a fantasy, William cut in from the head of the table. The market doesn't reward idealism, son. It rewards results. Eliza felt Rowan tense beside her. This was the trap. William was using the dinner to publicly humiliate his son, to prove to the investors that Rowan's ideas were naive and unworkable. She made a decision in that moment that she knew she'd either regret or remember as the best choice she'd ever made. Actually, she said, loud enough to cut through the conversation, the numbers suggest otherwise. Every eye in the room turned to her. The women looked scandalized that she'd spoken up at all. The men looked annoyed at the interruption. Excuse me, Harrison said. I said the numbers suggest otherwise. Eliza set down her fork, meeting his gaze directly. I've been managing the books for Rowan's operation. His cost per board foot is currently about 15% higher than standard clear-cut operations. But his timber grade's higher because selective cutting produces better quality wood. And he can harvest the same acres every 20 years instead of having to constantly move to new territory. Mrs. Hale, William said, his voice carrying a warning, I don't think, over a 50-year period, assuming market stability and accounting for the cost of acquiring new timber rights, Rowan's model projects to be about 37% more profitable than traditional operations. She pulled numbers from memory, the ledgers she'd spent months organizing. That's not fantasy, that's math. The silence was absolute. Harrison was staring at her like she'd grown a second head. You did those calculations? He asked. I did the bookkeeping. The calculations followed naturally. And you're certain about these numbers? I can show you the ledgers if you'd like. I brought them. She hadn't, but she was betting he wouldn't actually want to see them at dinner. She was right. Harrison sat back, exchanging glances with the other investors. Hale, you didn't mention your wife was mathematically inclined. I didn't think it was relevant to your decision-making, Rowan said, and Eliza could hear the barely suppressed laughter in his voice. It might be. If these numbers hold up, and I'd want to see them verified, it changes the risk assessment considerably. Harrison turned to William. Your son might be onto something after all. William's face had gone very still, the kind of stillness that meant he was furious but couldn't show it in front of guests. We can discuss the details at a later time. Why wait? Mrs. Hale seems perfectly capable of explaining it now. This from James Cooper, another investor. Tell me, how are you accounting for the longer rotation cycle? That's capital tied up for 2 decades. Eliza spent the next 20 minutes walking them through the financial model, answering questions, defending projections. She could feel William's anger radiating from the head of the table, but she couldn't stop now. This was the battle Caroline had warned her about, the one that would determine whether they went back to their valley as legitimate business people or as humiliated failures. So she fought with the only weapons she had, numbers and honesty and the kind of practical knowledge that came from spending her whole life making nothing stretch to cover everything. By the end of the dinner, 3 of the investors had expressed interest in seeing the full business plan. 2 had asked if Rowan was looking for additional capital, and Harrison had offered to introduce them to a lumber buyer in San Francisco who might pay premium prices for quality timber. William said nothing. He just watched Eliza with eyes that promised retribution. After the guests left, he cornered them in the hallway. "That was quite a performance," he said to Eliza. "It wasn't a performance. It was a presentation of facts. You embarrassed me in my own home, made me look like a fool in front of my investors. I made your son look credible. There's a difference." William's hand shot out, gripping her arm hard enough to hurt. "Listen to me, you little—" Rowan moved faster than Eliza had ever seen him move, his hand closing around his father's wrist like a vice. "Don't touch my wife," he said, his voice deadly quiet. For a long moment, father and son stood there, locked in silent combat. Then William released Eliza's arm and stepped back. "You've made your choice then," he said to Rowan. "Her over family. That's what this is. Family is supposed to support each other. You've been trying to destroy me since I came back." Rowan's voice was shaking with suppressed rage. "So yes, I choose her. Every time I choose her." "Then you're both fools." William straightened his jacket. "I'll give you one more chance. Come back to the company, properly this time. Put her aside, quietly, we'll arrange something, and salvage your reputation. That's my final offer." "No." "Then get out of my house." They packed that night and moved to a hotel. Caroline had been right about William planning something, but Eliza had turned it on its head. Instead of being destroyed at that dinner, they'd gained credibility. Investors who'd written Rowan off as a rebellious child were now seeing him as a potentially profitable venture. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Eliza lay awake in the hotel room, her arm aching where William had grabbed it, listening to Rowan pace in the adjoining room. Around midnight, the connecting door opened. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Too much adrenaline still." He came and sat on the edge of her bed, careful to maintain distance. "What you did tonight, that was incredible. That was necessary. It was brave." He looked at her in the dim light filtering through the curtains. "I've never seen anyone stand up to my father like that. Never seen anyone use his own investors against him. I just told them the truth. The numbers speak for themselves. The numbers speak for you." He reached out, then hesitated, his hand hovering in the air between them. "Can I see your arm?" She rolled up her sleeve, revealing the bruises already forming where William had grabbed her. Rowan's face went hard. "I should have stopped him sooner." "You stopped him when it mattered." She pulled her sleeve back down. "Besides, I've had worse. Bruises heal." "Not all of them." His voice was quiet. "Some leave marks you can't see." They sat in silence for a while, both thinking about the invisible damage they'd accumulated over their lives, the losses and humiliations and small deaths that shaped who they were. "I meant what I said to my father," Rowan said finally. "I choose you. Not because of what you did tonight, but because of who you are. Someone who doesn't quit. Someone who fights. I didn't have much choice about fighting. It was fight or die. Maybe. But you're still here. That counts for something." He stood up, moving back toward the connecting door. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start building our own network. No more playing by their rules." "Rowan?" He turned back. "Thank you," she said, "for defending me, for choosing me. Always," he said, and left. Eliza lay back down, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time since arriving in Denver, she felt something other than fear or determination. She felt like maybe she and Rowan were becoming more than just partners in a practical arrangement. Maybe they were becoming allies, maybe even friends. And in the morning, when she woke to find him already dressed and ready to face whatever came next, she thought that might be enough. For now. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in late February, carried up the mountain by a rider who charged double for the winter trip. Rowan read it once, his face going pale, then crumpled it in his fist. "What is it?" Eliza asked, looking up from the ledgers spread across the kitchen table. "My father." He tossed the wadded paper onto the table. "He's coming to Denver. Wants me to meet him there in 2 weeks for what he's calling a discussion about the family business." Eliza smoothed out the telegram and read it herself. The language was formal, cold, the kind of summons that wasn't really a request. "You don't have to go," she said. "If I don't, he'll come here. And I'd rather face him on neutral ground than have him show up in my valley. Rowan poured himself coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. He's bringing his lawyers and his business partners. This isn't just about me leaving. This is about something bigger. What do you think he wants? Control. Same thing he's always wanted. He drank the coffee in one long swallow. The timber rights up here, they're worth a fortune if you harvest them the traditional way. My father's been trying to buy access for years, but the old families who own the land won't sell to him. Too many burned bridges, too much bad blood from his clear-cutting operations elsewhere. Understanding clicked into place in Eliza's mind. But they might sell to you. Exactly. I'm the prodigal son with a different approach. If I can convince them I'll do it sustainably, they might give me rights my father could never get. And if I have those rights, he'll try to take them from you. Or force me into partnership. Or find some legal loophole to seize control. Rowan set down his cup hard enough that it cracked against the saucer. Either way, this meeting isn't about reconciliation. It's about business. Eliza looked at the telegram again, reading between the lines of formal language to the threat underneath. 2 weeks, not much time to prepare. Then we'd better make sure you're ready, she said. We? You think I'm staying here while you walk into whatever trap your father's setting? She stood up, already mentally organizing what needed to be done. If this is about business, you need documentation. Contracts, projections, proof that your method works. You need leverage. Eliza, you don't have to, I'm your wife, your partner. That's what you said, right? She met his eyes. So we do this together. Something shifted in his expression, relief, maybe, or gratitude, or something deeper that neither of them had words for yet. Together, he agreed. They spent the next 2 weeks preparing like they were going to war. Because in a way, they were. Eliza organized every scrap of documentation they had. Timber surveys, sustainability studies, financial projections, letters from the local families expressing interest in Rowan's approach. She created portfolios that presented the information clearly, professionally, the kind of thing that would hold up in a boardroom. Rowan worked with Thomas to gather samples of timber harvested using his selective method, showing how the quality was just as good as clear-cutting while leaving the forest intact. He compiled testimonials from the few workers he'd hired, men who'd been injured or burned out by his father's brutal operations, and found steadier, safer work in the valley. Marie sewed Eliza new dresses, proper ones for Denver society. Nothing fancy, they couldn't afford fancy, but respectable. The kind of clothes that said she belonged in the same rooms as rich men, even if she didn't. You're going to hate it, Marie warned, pinning a hem. City people are vicious when they smell weakness. I've dealt with worse than city people. Have you? Marie's eyes were shrewd. You've dealt with poor people doing mean things because they're desperate. Rich people do mean things for sport. That's different. Eliza thought about Marcus and his casual cruelty, the way he'd tried to buy her off like she was a problem to be solved. I can handle it. We'll see. 3 days before they were scheduled to leave, a letter arrived from Clearwater. Eliza recognized Mrs. Patterson's handwriting on the envelope. Her hands shook as she opened it. The letter was brief. Her father had taken a turn for the worse. The medicine had stopped working. Doc Warren said it was a matter of weeks now, maybe days. Eliza sat down hard, the letter falling from her fingers. What is it? Rowan asked, coming into the room. She couldn't speak, just pointed at the letter. He read it quickly, his face going soft with sympathy. We'll leave today, right now. Forget Denver, forget my father. No. The word came out stronger than she felt. No, we're going to Denver. Eliza, your father is dying. I know. She picked up the letter with numb fingers. But he's been dying for months, and if we don't go to Denver, your father will destroy everything you've built, everything we've worked for. None of that matters compared to you being with your father. It matters to him. She looked up at Rowan, tears burning in her eyes but not falling. Not yet. He sacrificed everything so I could have a future. If I throw away that future now, what was it all for? Eliza. We go to Denver. We face your father. We win. Her voice was shaking but determined. And then we go see my father, and I hold his hand, and I tell him that his sacrifice meant something, that I built something real with the chance he gave me. Rowan knelt in front of her chair, taking her cold hands in his. Are you sure? No, she wasn't sure of anything except that if she went to Clearwater now, she'd fall apart. And if she fell apart, she'd be useless in Denver. And if they lost in Denver, everything, her father's sacrifice, her marriage, the valley, all of it, would be for nothing. I'm sure, she lied. They left for Denver the next morning. The city rose out of the plains like something from another world. Tall buildings, paved streets, electric lights beginning to appear on corners. Eliza had never seen anything like it. Even the air felt different here, thick with coal smoke and noise, and the press of too many people in too small a space. It's overwhelming at first, Rowan said, guiding their hired carriage through the crowded streets. You get used to it. Do you? She watched a woman in a dress that probably cost more than the cabin she'd grown up in step over a beggar without looking down. Get used to it? No, that's why I left. They checked into a modest hotel, nothing fancy, but clean and respectable. Rowan had wanted to stay somewhere cheaper, conserving money, but Eliza had insisted on spending a bit more. Appearances mattered to these people, she'd said. If we show up looking poor, they'll treat us like we are. She'd been thinking about that a lot during the trip, about how perception shaped reality in ways that had nothing to do with truth, about how her worn dresses and rough hands had marked her as worthless in Marcus's eyes, regardless of her actual capabilities. If they were going into battle, they needed to look like warriors, not beggars. The meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning at the offices of Hale Timber Company, an impressive building in the business district with the family name carved above the entrance in letters 2 feet tall. Eliza stood on the sidewalk, staring up at it, feeling her courage waver. Last chance to change your mind, Rowan said quietly. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed her new dress, and lifted her chin. Let's go. The lobby was all dark wood and polished brass, designed to intimidate. A secretary looked up as they entered, her expression going through several rapid changes: surprise, disdain, professional neutrality. We're here to see Mr. Hale, Rowan said. He's expecting us. Of course, Mr. Hale. Her voice managed to convey that she meant the other Mr. Hale, the real one. 3rd floor, conference room. They climbed the stairs in silence. Eliza's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. At the top, Rowan paused and looked at her. Whatever happens in there, we're in this together. Remember that. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He pushed open the conference room door. The room was full of men in expensive suits, at least a dozen of them, seated around a massive table. At the head sat a man who could only be Rowan's father, older, heavier, but with the same dark eyes, harder now, and calculating. Next to him sat Marcus, looking smug. Rowan. The elder Hale didn't stand. You're late. No, we're exactly on time. Rowan pulled out a chair for Eliza, then sat beside her. Father, this is my wife, Eliza. Eliza, my father, Robert Hale. Robert's eyes swept over her with all the warmth of a snake eyeing prey. So this is the girl who thinks she's good enough for my son. This is the woman who married your son, Eliza corrected, keeping her voice level. Whether I'm good enough is between him and me, not you. Something flickered in Robert's expression, surprise, maybe, or reassessment. Marcus leaned forward, clearly ready to speak, but his father held up a hand. Let's get down to business, Robert said. You've been playing farmer in the mountains for almost a year now, Rowan. Had your little adventure. Time to come home. I am home. You're living in a shack pretending to run a business. That's not home. That's a fantasy. Robert pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. These are the families that control timber rights in your valley and the surrounding mountains. 15 different landholders representing approximately 40,000 acres of prime timber. Rowan didn't touch the folder. I know who they are. Then you know they've refused to sell to me for years. But they like you. See you as different from the old man. Robert's smile was thin. You could get access to those rights. And if you do, you bring them into the family business where they belong. I'm not bringing anything into your business. I left, remember? You left with my money. My money? I earned it. You earned it working for me, which means it came from Hale Timber. Robert leaned back, steepling his fingers. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to negotiate timber rights with those families using the reputation you've built. You're going to sign those rights over to the company. And in exchange, I'll give you a management position here, a proper salary, and enough money to settle your wife somewhere comfortable while you do real work. The casual dismissal in those words, settling her somewhere comfortable like she was a pet to be housed, made Eliza's blood boil. But she kept quiet, watching, learning how these men operated. "And if I refuse?" Rowan asked. "Then I pull your access to the family accounts, cut off the trust fund you've been living on. Let's see how long your sustainable forestry project lasts when you can't pay your workers or buy supplies." Robert's voice was cold. "You'll come crawling back within 6 months." "I don't have access to family accounts anymore. I've been self-sufficient for months." Robert laughed. "Self-sufficient? You've spent almost $8,000 since you left. Where do you think that money came from?" Rowan went very still. "I earned that money. It was in my private account, which is drawn on the family bank, managed by family lawyers, subject to family oversight." Robert pulled out another paper. "According to the trust documents your grandfather established, any Hale under the age of 30 needs parental approval for withdrawals over $5,000. You're 27, Rowan. Every cent you've spent building your little paradise was technically borrowed against future earnings." Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Rowan and saw the same shock mirrored there. "You're lying," Rowan said, but his voice was uncertain. "I'm stating facts. Check with your own lawyer if you don't believe me." Robert's smile widened. "So here's the new terms. You sign over the timber rights, come back to the company, and I'll forgive the debt. Consider it a wedding gift. Or you refuse, and I'll call in what you owe plus interest. That's about $12,000 now. How long can you survive in those mountains with a $12,000 debt hanging over your head?" The room went silent. Eliza could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of every eye in the room watching them like spectators at an execution. This was the trap. This was what Robert had built the entire meeting around, making Rowan feel helpless, making him understand that he'd never really escaped at all. "Can I see those trust documents?" Eliza heard herself ask. Robert's eyes shifted to her, annoyed at the interruption. "This is a family matter." "I'm family now. Can I see them or not?" With clear reluctance, Robert pushed the papers across the table. Eliza picked them up and started reading, her heart pounding. She wasn't a lawyer, but she'd read enough contracts helping her father to understand basic legal language. And she knew how to spot loopholes. "This clause here," she said, pointing to a section, "it says parental approval is needed for withdrawals over $5,000 from trust accounts." But Rowan wasn't withdrawing from a trust. He was withdrawing from his personal savings account that he deposited money into from his salary, which was paid from trust funds, which were payment for labor performed. Eliza looked up, meeting Robert's eyes. "Unless you're claiming you never actually paid him for 8 years of work, because that would be a different legal problem entirely." One of the other men at the table, a lawyer based on his expression, leaned forward. "Mrs. Hale raises an interesting point. If the salary was legitimate payment for services rendered, it wouldn't be subject to trust restrictions once deposited in a personal account." "That's a technicality," Robert snapped. "It's the law," the lawyer said. "And if this went to court—" "It's not going to court." Robert's face was flushed now, angry at being challenged. "Rowan, are you going to let your little wife play lawyer? This is embarrassing." "Actually," Rowan said, and Eliza heard something new in his voice. Confidence, maybe, or anger finally breaking through shock. "I think she's making sense. You're trying to intimidate me with debt that doesn't legally exist. That's fraud, Father." "It's business. It's fraud," another man at the table said. This one was older, with gray hair and a face that had seen too many negotiations. "Robert, I don't know what you thought you'd accomplish here, but threatening your son with fake debt, isn't it? If this gets out, the whole company's reputation—" "Fine." Robert stood up abruptly. "You want to play it that way? Keep your valley. Keep your little business. But when you fail, and you will fail, don't come asking for help. You'll be dead to this family." "I've been dead to this family since I left," Rowan said quietly. "I'm just making it official now." He stood, offering his hand to Eliza. She took it, gathering her portfolio of documents, and they walked toward the door together. "One more thing," Eliza said, turning back. "Those 15 families you mentioned, the ones with the timber rights, 3 of them have already agreed to work with Rowan. We have signed preliminary contracts giving him harvest access with strict sustainability requirements. So if you were planning to go around us and approach them directly, you're too late. It was a bluff. They only had letters of interest, not actual contracts. But the look on Robert's face was worth the risk. They made it out of the building before Eliza's legs gave out. She sat down hard on a bench outside, breathing fast, her whole body shaking with adrenaline. "Did that really just happen?" she asked. "I think so." Rowan sat beside her, looking dazed. "Did you really catch that loophole in the trust documents?" "I think so. Maybe. I'm not a lawyer, but it seemed right." She laughed, high and slightly hysterical. "We might have just destroyed your relationship with your father forever based on my interpretation of legal language." "Good." Rowan took her hand. "Because he was wrong. About the debt, about us, about everything, and you were the only one brave enough to call him on it." "I was terrified." "You didn't show it. You were amazing." He squeezed her fingers. "Thank you. For standing with me. For being smarter than everyone in that room." They sat there for a while, watching Denver move around them, neither of them quite able to process what they'd just done. Finally, Eliza stood. "We need to go." "Go where?" "To Clearwater, to see my father." Her voice cracked. "I need to tell him we won. Before—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Rowan stood and pulled her close, right there on the busy sidewalk, not caring who saw. "We'll leave today," he said. "Right now." They took the fastest route possible, changing horses twice, barely stopping to rest. Eliza felt like she was racing against death itself, trying to outrun the inevitable. They reached Clearwater 3 days later, at dawn. The cabin looked the same as always, small, worn, barely standing, but the silence from inside was different. Eliza knew before she opened the door. Mrs. Patterson met her in the doorway, her face saying everything. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "He passed yesterday evening, peaceful, in his sleep. He wasn't in pain." The world tilted. Eliza felt Rowan's arms catch her as her knees buckled, felt him holding her up while everything inside her broke into pieces too small to ever put back together. "He talked about you at the end," Mrs. Patterson was saying through Eliza's fog of grief. "Said he was proud of you, said you were going to do great things." Eliza couldn't respond, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Rowan guided her inside, sat her in the chair by her father's bed, empty now, the body already prepared for burial. She stared at the space where he'd been, trying to make sense of a world that no longer had her father in it. "I should have been here," she whispered. "He wouldn't have wanted that." Mrs. Patterson's voice was gentle. "He told me so. Said you had important things to do, and he didn't want you watching him die. Wanted you to remember him getting better, not getting worse. I never got to tell him. About Denver, about standing up to Rowan's father. He knew." Mrs. Patterson pressed something into her hand, a folded piece of paper, worn from handling. "He wrote this 2 days ago. Asked me to give it to you." Eliza unfolded it with shaking fingers. Her father's handwriting, shakier than usual but still recognizable. "Eliza, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't cry too much. I've had a good run, and these last months with proper medicine and food were a gift. I need you to know something. I was wrong to think I failed. I didn't build a farm or a fortune, but I built you. And you're stronger, smarter, and braver than I ever was. Whatever happened in Denver, and knowing you, you gave them hell. I'm proud of you. Not because of what you accomplished, but because you kept going even when it was hard. That's all any of us can do. Live big, love hard. Don't let anyone tell you you're not enough. You're more than enough. You always were. Love, Dad." Eliza read it 3 times, tears finally breaking through, streaming down her face in a flood she couldn't stop. Rowan held her while she sobbed, while she broke apart and raged against the unfairness of everything, while she mourned not just her father but the life they could have had if the world had been kinder. They buried Thomas Hart the next day in the small cemetery outside Clearwater, next to her mother. The whole town came. Not many people left, but the ones who remained showed up to pay respects. Pastor Whitfield said words that washed over Eliza without landing. Something about rest and peace and reunions in the afterlife. She didn't believe any of it. Death was just absence. Her father was gone, and no words would bring him back. But when it was over, when the last shovel of dirt had been placed and people started to leave, Mrs. Patterson came up to her. "He paid me through the end of the year," she said. "Wanted to make sure I was taken care of even after, well, that was the kind of man he was." Others came with similar stories. Thomas had quietly arranged things before he died, paid debts, settled accounts, made sure loose ends were tied up, taking care of people even at the end. "He taught you well," Rowan said quietly as they rode away from Clearwater for the last time. "How to take care of people. How to stand up when it matters. How to survive. I just wish he'd survived longer. He survived long enough to see you safe, long enough to know you'd be okay." Rowan glanced at her. "That's all parents really want, isn't it? To know their children will be okay after they're gone." Eliza thought about that as they climbed back up into the mountains, back toward the valley that was slowly becoming home. Her father had lived long enough to see her married, settled, with a future that wasn't tied to poverty and desperation. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that had to be enough. They arrived home to find a letter waiting, registered mail from Denver, official looking. Rowan opened it while Eliza watched, her stomach tight with anxiety. "It's from the lawyer," he said, scanning the contents. "The one who spoke up during the meeting. He's done research on the trust documents. Says my interpretation was correct. The debt doesn't exist. My father has no legal claim on any money I've spent." "That's good." "There's more. 3 of his business partners, the ones who were in the meeting, have reached out. They're interested in investing in my operation. Not controlling it, just investing. They think sustainable forestry could be profitable if it's managed right." Eliza felt a flicker of something she thought she'd lost. Hope, maybe. Or just the possibility of a future that didn't involve constant struggle. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." He set down the letter. "This is exactly what I wanted. Validation that my approach works, investment to make it real, a chance to prove my father wrong. But it also means dealing with businessmen and contracts and all the things I left the city to escape. Nothing's ever simple, is it?" "No. But at least now we get to choose what complicated looks like." He looked at her, his expression serious. "I couldn't have done this without you. The way you caught that loophole, the way you stood up to them. I was guessing half the time. You were brilliant all the time." He took her hands. "I know the last few weeks have been hell. Losing your father, fighting my family, all of it. But you've been incredible through every bit of it, stronger than anyone I've ever known." Eliza felt tears threatening again, but different tears this time. Not grief, exactly. Something more complicated. "I'm not strong," she said. "I'm just stubborn." "Same thing, maybe." He smiled a little. "Eliza, I know this started as a business arrangement, a practical solution to our problems. But somewhere along the way," he stopped, like he wasn't sure how to finish. "Somewhere along the way, it became real," Eliza finished for him. "I know. I feel it too." They stood there in the cabin they'd built together. Not physically built, but built nonetheless through shared struggles and small victories and the slow accumulation of trust. "So what do we do now?" Rowan asked. Eliza thought about her father's letter. Live big, love hard. Don't let anyone tell you you're not enough. "We keep going," she said. "We build this business. We prove everyone wrong. We make something that lasts. Together, together." It wasn't a declaration of love. They weren't there yet, might never be there in the storybook sense. But it was a commitment, a choice to keep choosing each other day after day through whatever came next. And maybe that was more honest than romance anyway. Maybe that was real. Spring came to the valley like a cautious promise, melting snow revealing the bones of the land underneath. Eliza stood at the edge of the forest Rowan had marked for the first harvest, watching men she didn't know set up equipment under his careful supervision. The investors had come through. 3 of them, each putting in enough capital to make the operation legitimate. But they'd also sent representatives, city men in suits who didn't understand mountains or trees or anything beyond profit margins. "Mrs. Hale." One of them approached her now, picking his way across the muddy ground like it might contaminate him. His name was Gerald Patterson, and he worked for the largest investor. I need to discuss the worker housing situation. What about it? It's excessive. You're proposing individual cabins with heating stoves, proper beds, a communal kitchen. These are laborers, not hotel guests. Eliza had spent the last month drafting workers' contracts and living arrangements based on what she'd learned from the men Rowan had already hired, men who'd left his father's brutal camps seeking something better. These are human beings who'll be working dangerous jobs in difficult conditions, she said. They deserve basic comfort and dignity. They deserve wages. Anything beyond that cuts into profit. Actually, it increases profit. She pulled out the ledger she'd been carrying. I've run the numbers. Proper housing and food means healthier workers who miss fewer days due to injury or illness. It means lower turnover, which saves money on training new men. And it means we attract better workers who do quality work instead of just whoever's desperate enough to take any job. Patterson looked at the figures she'd written out, his expression skeptical. These projections assume everything goes perfectly. They assume we treat people well, and they respond by working harder. It's not complicated. It's naive. He closed the ledger and handed it back. In the real world, workers take advantage of kindness. Give them comfort, and they'll demand more. It's a slippery slope. In the real world, treating people like they're disposable makes them act disposable. Eliza kept her voice level, but something hot was building in her chest. I've seen what your kind of management creates. Angry men who cut corners because they don't care if the company succeeds. Men who get injured and have no loyalty to keep quiet about unsafe conditions. Is that what you want? What I want is return on investment. Then trust the people who actually understand this work. She gestured at Rowan, who was showing the logging crew how to identify which trees to take and which to leave. We're not asking you to sacrifice profit. We're asking you to be smart about how you make it. Patterson studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected when they said Rowan had married a local girl. No one ever is. She'd learned that lesson well in Denver. Learned that being underestimated was sometimes useful. Are we building the cabins or not? We'll build them, but if the numbers don't work out, they will. He walked away, shaking his head. Eliza watched him go, feeling the familiar mix of anger and satisfaction. Every day was a battle like this, fighting to prove that doing things differently didn't mean doing them wrong. You handled that well, Marie said, appearing beside her with a basket of lunch for the workers. Didn't even call him what he deserved to be called. I'm saving that for when he really pisses me off. Marie laughed, the sound rough and real. Over the months, the older woman had gone from suspicious of Eliza to something approaching friendship, or at least mutual respect built on shared annoyance at stupid men. How's Rowan holding up? Marie asked, looking at where he stood among the workers. He's nervous. This is the first real test of whether his method works at scale. Eliza had seen it in the way he barely slept, going over plans and calculations until his eyes were red. If this harvest fails, it won't fail. He knows what he's doing. Knowing and proving are different things. The first tree came down mid-morning, a massive pine that had been marked for removal because it was diseased at the core. Rowan directed the fall with precision, making sure it landed clear of the younger growth around it. The sound of it hitting the ground echoed through the valley like thunder. Eliza felt something tight in her chest loosen. One tree. Just one. But it was a start. By the end of the week, they'd harvested 15 trees from a section that held over 200. The remaining forest looked barely touched, which was exactly the point. Rowan had the timber transported to the partially completed mill, where it would be processed and sold at premium prices to buyers who were starting to care about sustainability. It's working, he said that night over dinner, looking exhausted but genuinely happy for the first time in weeks. The quality is good, the forest is intact, and we're on schedule. The investors are still skeptical, Eliza said. Of course they are. They won't believe it until they see profit. He reached across the table and took her hand. But we'll show them, one harvest at a time. Thomas came in from outside, stomping mud off his boots. Got a visitor coming up the road. Fancy carriage. Eliza felt her stomach drop. Your father? No. Rowan stood up, looking out the window. Worse. That's Richard Morrison's carriage, one of the big landowners I've been trying to negotiate with. Morrison turned out to be a barrel-chested man in his 60s with a face like weathered leather and eyes that missed nothing. He accepted Marie's offer of coffee, but refused food, settling into the chair Rowan offered with the air of someone used to being in charge. "I'll be direct," he said. "I've been watching your operation. Had my men keeping an eye on how you work, what you take, what you leave behind." "And?" Rowan's voice was carefully neutral. "And I'm impressed. Not many people have the discipline to take only what they need." Morrison drank his coffee in one swallow. "Your father approached me 6 times over the years trying to buy timber rights to my land. Each time I told him no. You know why? Because he clear-cuts everything and leaves nothing. That's part of it. Other part is I don't trust men who only see trees as money. Land's more than that. It's legacy, something you pass down that still means something." He set down the cup. "My grandfather homesteaded that property, built a life there. I'm not letting some corporation strip it bare for quarterly profits." Eliza watched Rowan's face, saw hope starting to break through his careful control. "But you," Morrison continued, "you seem to understand that. So here's what I'm proposing. You can have harvest rights to the south section of my property, about 800 acres. 20-year contract, renewable if you maintain your standards. In exchange, you teach my sons your methods. They're going to inherit this land eventually, and I want them to know how to manage it right." The offer was massive. 800 acres would triple their harvestable timber, provide steady income for years, and prove to the other landowners that Morrison trusted them. "I accept," Rowan said, extending his hand. Morrison shook it firmly. Then he turned to Eliza. "I hear you're the brains behind the worker housing plans." "I'm one of the brains. My wife wants to meet you. Says any woman who can make these logging companies treat workers like humans is worth knowing." He stood up, preparing to leave. "She's hosting a gathering next month. Ranchers, landowners, business people from the area. You should come. Both of you." After he left, Rowan pulled Eliza into a hug that lifted her off her feet. "We did it," he said. "We actually did it. We did part of it. Morrison's one landowner. We need at least 3 more to make this really work." Always the pessimist. Always the realist. But she was smiling, feeling genuine happiness for the first time since her father's death. Though I'll admit, this is a good start. The gathering at the Morrison Ranch was unlike anything Eliza had experienced. It wasn't fancy like Denver society, no crystal chandeliers or orchestra music, but it was powerful in a different way. These were the people who actually owned the land, who made decisions about what happened in the mountains. And they were curious about her. "So you're the girl who told Robert Hale to go to hell," a woman named Catherine Wells said, cornering Eliza near the refreshment table. She was in her 50s, dressed practically but expensively, with the kind of direct gaze that demanded honesty. "I never used those exact words. But that was the gist of it?" Catherine's smile was sharp. "Good. Robert's been bullying people in these mountains for 20 years. About time someone stood up to him. It wasn't just me. My husband. Your husband had been trying to stand up to his father for years and getting nowhere. You're the one who found the legal loophole that freed him." Catherine studied her with open interest. "Morrison says you've got plans for worker safety and fair wages. That true?" "It's just good business. It's revolutionary is what it is. Most operations treat loggers like they're replaceable. Use them up and move on." Catherine's voice dropped. "My brother died in one of Robert's camps 15 years ago, crushed by equipment that hadn't been maintained properly. Company paid my mother $50 and told her it was his own fault for being careless." Eliza felt anger kindle in her chest. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be different." Catherine leaned closer. "I own 1,200 acres on the eastern slope. Been sitting on them because I won't sell to anyone who operates like Robert. But if you and your husband are serious about doing things right, we should talk." By the end of the evening, Eliza had talked to 5 different landowners, all expressing interest in working with them. Rowan was in similar conversations across the room, his face animated in a way she rarely saw. On the ride home, he was almost giddy. "Did you hear what Jenkins said? He's ready to sign a contract. And the Patterson family, different Pattersons, not the investors, they want to discuss terms. This is happening, Eliza. It's actually happening." don't get ahead of yourself. Interest isn't the same as signed contracts. Why are you always expecting the worst? Because I've lived the worst. She looked out at the dark mountains passing by. I know what it's like when things fall apart, so I prepare for it. His hand found hers in the darkness. Things aren't going to fall apart. Not this time. She wanted to believe him, but she'd learned early that hope was dangerous, that it set you up for devastation when reality came crashing down. Still, she squeezed his hand back. Let herself have this moment of possibility. The crash came in late May. Patterson, the investor's representative, showed up at the Valley with 2 other men and a folder full of documents. We need to talk about restructuring, he said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. Rowan looked at the documents, his face going pale. What is this? A proposal to increase efficiency. We've analyzed your first harvest and the numbers are good, but they could be better. If you increase the percentage taken from each section from 30% to 60%. No. Rowan's voice was flat. You double production while only marginally increasing environmental impact. The impact isn't marginal. 60% is too much. The forest can't regenerate properly with that much removed. That's debatable. We've brought in our own forestry experts and they disagree with your assessment. Patterson pulled out another document. According to their analysis, 50 to 70% removal is sustainable with proper replanting. Your experts are wrong. Rowan stood up, his chair scraping back. This is exactly what my father does. Take too much, promise to replant, never actually follow through because replanting is expensive and slow. We're not your father. We'd actually replant. For how long? Until it cuts too deep into profits? Rowan's voice was rising. This is my operation. I set the standards, and the standard is 30% maximum. Patterson's expression hardened. Then we have a problem. Because our investment contract has a clause that allows us to recommend operational changes if we feel the business is being mismanaged, and refusing to maximize profit could be considered mismanagement. Eliza had been listening quietly, but now she pulled out her own copy of the investment contract, the one she'd read thoroughly before Rowan signed it. The clause you're referring to allows you to make recommendations, she said. It doesn't give you control over operations. That remains with Rowan as majority owner and operator. Majority owner with our capital keeping the business afloat. Capital you invested knowing our methods and standards. Changing those standards now would be breach of good faith. That's your interpretation. It's the correct interpretation. And if you push this, we'll take it to arbitration, which will cost everyone time and money and make you look like the kind of investors who lie about their intentions. Eliza met his eyes. Is that really what you want? The standoff lasted for several long seconds. Finally, Patterson gathered his papers. We'll discuss this with our partners, but understand, if this operation doesn't start showing better returns soon, we'll exercise our right to withdraw investment, and without capital, you'll be back to square one. He left with his associates, kicking up dust as their carriage disappeared down the mountain road. They're going to pull out, Rowan said once they were gone. Without their investment, we can't afford to expand, can barely afford to maintain what we have. Then we find other investors, or we scale back and grow slower. Slower isn't fast enough. Morrison and the others are ready to sign now. If we can't deliver on the promises we made, we'll figure it out. But even as she said it, Eliza felt the old fear creeping back. The fear that they'd built something fragile, that one strong wind would blow it all apart. The blow came from an unexpected direction. A week after Patterson's visit, a lawyer arrived with papers. Not from the investors, from Robert Hale. You're being sued, the lawyer said, handing over the documents, for damages related to unfair business practices and interference with contractual relationships. Rowan read through the papers, his face going white. This is insane. What contractual relationships? Your father claims he had verbal agreements with several of the landowners you're now negotiating with. Says you poisoned those relationships by spreading false information about his business practices. They're not false. His operations are documented disasters. That's for the court to decide. In the meantime, there's an injunction preventing you from finalizing any new timber contracts until the suit is resolved. The lawsuit was clearly designed to strangle them. Without new contracts, they couldn't prove viability. Without proving viability, they couldn't attract new investors. And legal battles were expensive, the kind of expensive that could drain their resources in months. "He's trying to force you back," Eliza said after the lawyer left. "Make it impossible for you to succeed independently, so you have to come crawling back to the family business." "It's working." Rowan sat at his desk, head in his hands. "We don't have money for a prolonged legal fight, and even if we did, the injunction means we're dead in the water." Eliza looked at the papers, at the elegant legal language designed to destroy them, and felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear this time. Anger. "We need to fight dirty," she said. "What?" "Your father's fighting dirty. Using the courts to bully us, making up fake agreements, trying to ruin your reputation. So we fight back the same way." "Eliza, I'm not going to stoop to, not that kind of dirty. Smart dirty." She was already thinking, pieces clicking together in her mind. "Your father's operation has problems, right? Safety violations, worker complaints, environmental damage?" "Documented extensively." "Then we document more. We find every worker who's been injured, every family who's been hurt, every mountain that's been destroyed. We compile it into something undeniable, and we give it to newspapers, to government regulators, to anyone who'll listen." "That would destroy him." "He's trying to destroy us. Turnabout is fair play." Rowan looked at her, conflict clear on his face. "He's still my father." "He stopped being your father when he chose money over you." Her voice was hard. "You don't owe him mercy, not after everything he's done." It took 3 weeks to compile the evidence. Eliza worked with Catherine Wells and other families who'd lost people to Robert's operations. They gathered injury reports, death certificates, photographs of clear-cut mountains left barren and eroding, testimony from workers who'd been maimed and discarded. The picture that emerged was damning. Decades of putting profit over safety, of treating workers as disposable, of destroying land without thought for what came after. "This is enough to trigger state and federal investigations," Catherine said, looking at the compiled evidence. "Maybe even criminal charges." "Will it stop the lawsuit?" Eliza asked. "It'll give you leverage. Judges don't like seeing plaintiffs with dirty hands. And if Robert's dealing with regulatory scrutiny, he might be willing to drop the suit in exchange for you not pursuing things further." It wasn't perfect, but it was a chance. They delivered the evidence to 3 newspapers, 2 regulatory agencies, and the judge handling their case. Then they waited. The response was immediate and explosive. The newspapers ran stories with headlines like "Empire Built on Blood" and "The True Cost of Timber Profits." Investigators showed up at Robert's operations asking questions. Workers started coming forward with their own stories, emboldened by seeing others speak up. And Robert's lawsuit quietly disappeared. No formal withdrawal, no public apology. Just a filing from his lawyers saying the plaintiff was no longer pursuing the matter. "He's done," Catherine said when she brought them the news. "My sources say the regulatory investigations found enough violations to shut down 3 of his camps. He's facing fines that'll cost him millions. And several of his business partners have pulled out, worried about being associated with the bad publicity." Eliza felt no triumph in it, just exhaustion and a grim satisfaction that they'd survived. "Does this make me a terrible person?" she asked Rowan that night. "Destroying your father." "You didn't destroy him. You exposed what he'd been doing all along. There's a difference." "Tell that to the part of me that feels like I just burned down someone's life." "He would have burned down ours without hesitation." Rowan pulled her close. "You did what you had to do, what we had to do. That's not terrible. That's survival." Maybe he was right, or maybe they'd both become the kind of people who could justify anything if it meant protecting what was theirs. Either way, they'd won. With the lawsuit gone and Robert's reputation in shambles, the landowners who'd been nervous about working with them suddenly became enthusiastic. Morrison accelerated his timeline. Catherine signed a contract for her 1,200 acres. The Jenkins family and 3 others followed suit. Within 2 months, they had contracts for over 5,000 acres of harvestable timber. The investors who'd threatened to pull out suddenly wanted back in. Patterson showed up at the valley again, his attitude completely changed. "We may have been hasty in our assessment," he said. "Your methods clearly have value." "We don't want your investment anymore," Eliza said. Patterson blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You tried to force us to compromise our standards. We don't work with people we can't trust." She pulled out a check, signed by 3 new investors Catherine had connected them with, mountain people who understood what they were trying to build. We found partners who actually share our values, but thank you for the opportunity. She handed him back all the documents from his original investment, along with a check returning his money, plus the contractually agreed-upon return. Patterson looked at the papers like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. You're making a mistake. We're making a choice. There's a difference. After he left, Rowan started laughing. Did you really just fire our investors? They were bad investors. We're better off without them. We might have just made powerful enemies. We've already got powerful enemies. What's a few more? She grinned at him, feeling reckless and alive. Besides, I'm tired of being scared of what might happen. Let's just build something and see where it goes. The expansion happened faster than either of them expected. By late summer, they had 2 full logging crews working under Rowan's supervision. The mill was completed and operating at capacity. They'd hired a supervisor, one of the workers injured in Robert's camps, who understood the value of safe operations. Eliza managed the business side, negotiating contracts and handling finances with a confidence that surprised her. She'd started as a girl who could barely imagine a future beyond survival. Now she was running a business that employed 30 people and had its own reputation for quality and ethics. Sometimes she caught sight of herself in mirrors and didn't recognize who she'd become. One afternoon in September, almost exactly a year after her wedding, she and Rowan rode out to one of the harvest sites to check on progress. The forest here was thick with pine and aspen, leaves just starting to turn gold with the changing season. Look at that, Rowan said, pointing to a section they'd harvested 3 months earlier. New growth was already coming up between the remaining trees, saplings finding light, undergrowth filling in. It's regenerating. Did you doubt it would? Every day. He dismounted and walked into the recovering forest, running his hand over a young pine. Every single day I wondered if I was wrong, if my father's way was the only way that worked. But you weren't wrong. No, we weren't wrong. He turned to her, his expression soft. I couldn't have done this without you. You know that, right? All your work on the contracts, standing up to the investors, the whole thing with my father. We did it together. No, Eliza, you saved this. You saved me. He came back to her, taking her hands. When I married you, I thought I was giving you security. Turns out you were giving me something more important, purpose, direction. Someone to build with instead of just building for. She felt her throat tighten. Don't get sentimental. It doesn't suit you. I'm serious. This last year... He stopped, searching for words. I fell in love with you. I don't know when exactly. Maybe it was watching you read those trust documents. Maybe it was seeing you turn down $20,000. Maybe it happened slowly, bit by bit, until one day I realized I couldn't imagine doing this without you. Eliza's heart was pounding. They'd never talked about love before. They'd built something real without needing to name it. But hearing him say it made something inside her crack open. I'm not easy to love, she said. I'm stubborn and angry, and I expect the worst from everyone. I know, it's my favorite thing about you. I don't know if I'm good at love, the romantic kind. Neither have I, so we'll figure it out together, like everything else. He pulled her closer. I'm not asking you to be different. I'm just telling you how I feel. What you do with that is up to you. She looked at him. This man who'd offered her a desperate deal a year ago, who'd hidden who he was out of fear, who'd slowly become the most important person in her life without her quite noticing when. I love you too, she said, the words feeling strange and true. I think I have for a while. I just didn't know what to call it. He kissed her then, properly, for the first time since their wedding. Not the perfunctory press of lips from that day, but something real and deep and full of all the things they'd built together. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Eliza laughed. What? Rowan asked. I just realized we fell in love working, doing business, fighting your family, and building contracts. She shook her head. That's the most unromantic love story I've ever heard. Or the most honest one. Yeah, maybe that. They stood there in the recovering forest, surrounded by new growth and old trees, the valley spreading out below them in shades of gold and green. The winter came and went, then spring again, bringing new contracts and new challenges. The business grew steadily, not explosively, but sustainably, which was the point. They hired more workers, expanded operations, proved year after year that their method worked. Robert Hale's empire contracted as investigations and fines and public scrutiny took their toll. Marcus left the family business entirely. Last they heard, gone off to try his own ventures elsewhere. Robert himself became something of a cautionary tale. The old way of doing things, the brutal approach that was finally being recognized as unsustainable. Eliza went back to Clearwater once a year, bringing flowers to her father's grave and sitting there talking to the empty air about everything that had happened, telling him about the business, about Rowan, about how she'd taken the chance he'd given her and built something that would last. She liked to think he heard her somehow. That wherever dead fathers went, he knew she'd kept her promise to make it mean something. The valley became famous, in a small way. Forestry students visited to study their methods. Other operations tried to replicate their approach with varying degrees of success. They were never the biggest timber company, never the most profitable, but they were something more important. They were proof that different was possible. 5 years after her wedding, Eliza stood in the office they'd expanded, looking at maps marked with harvest areas and regeneration zones. The business employed 80 people now. They had contracts for over 12,000 acres, and they'd just been approached by the territorial government about developing sustainable forestry guidelines for other operations to follow. From a desperate farm girl to this, sometimes she still couldn't quite believe it. Rowan came in, carrying a letter. This came from Morrison. His youngest son wants to work with us for a year, learn the operation before taking over the family land. Tell him yes. We could use another good manager. Already did. He set down the letter and wrapped his arms around her from behind. Marie's making us dinner at the house. She says we work too much and forget to eat. Marie's not wrong. She rarely is. He kissed the side of her neck. Come on, the maps will still be here tomorrow. They walked back to the house through the spring evening, past the expanded complex of buildings, past workers heading home after their shifts, past all the physical evidence of what they'd built from nothing, and desperation, and a marriage that shouldn't have worked. Inside, the table was set for 3. Marie had made stew and fresh bread, muttering about how they'd both waste away if she didn't keep feeding them. Over dinner, Rowan talked about plans for the summer harvest. Marie complained about one of the workers who kept tracking mud through her kitchen. Eliza listened and added her own thoughts, and felt something she hadn't felt since before her mother died. Content, maybe even happy. It wasn't a perfect life. There were still struggles, still challenges, still days when she wondered if it would all come crashing down. But they faced those things together, building something day by day that was stronger than any one person could create alone. That night, lying next to Rowan in the bed they'd been sharing for 3 years now, Eliza thought about the girl who'd married a stranger to save her dying father. About how that girl had thought she was surrendering her future to survive. She'd been wrong. She hadn't surrendered anything. She'd fought for it. Every day, every decision, every moment she chose to keep going instead of giving up. And somewhere in that fight, she'd become someone new, someone stronger, someone who'd learned that survival wasn't just about making it through. It was about building something worth living for. What are you thinking about? Rowan asked in the darkness. How far we've come. Long way from that cabin in Clearwater. Long way from the man who offered to buy a wife. She rolled over to face him. You know what my father told me right before I married you? What? The marriage is 2 people deciding to make it work, over and over, every day. She touched his face. I think he was right. He usually was. They lay there in comfortable silence, listening to the mountain wind outside and the familiar creaks of the house settling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new battles to fight. But they'd face them the same way they'd faced everything else, together. And that, more than money or success or any other measure, was what made it all worthwhile. The valley slept under stars ancient and indifferent. The forest grew, were harvested carefully, grew again. Workers went home to families, to lives made possible by fair wages and safe conditions. And in the big house that had once seemed too grand for a farm girl, Eliza Hale closed her eyes and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the hard parts were worth it. Because she'd learned something important in the year since that desperate wedding. You don't escape hard lives. You just trade one set of problems for another. The trick is finding problems worth solving and people worth solving them with. She'd found both. And that was enough.